поперлася москальня, казавши на парад Київ іде, любим сусідам руський мір принесе. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Десь у полях, танки ворожі шукав собі шлях, а фермери українські ті танки знайшли і собі на тракторі додому потягли. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Україна засіває в землю руські добрива. Каже Пісков, що потерь у нас нет, з неба летить вам Байрактара привет. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Україна стала до бою і міцна, як стіна. Б'є ЗСУ, артилерія б'є, жоден москаль у наш дім не зайде. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячий отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні. У нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 afternoon to everyone around the world. I am the Enforcer, and we are here back again with Enforcer Matt.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to day 134 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. And as the stream starts right now, the dawn is setting on day 135 in Ukraine, and we have a whole 24 hours of news to cover on day 134. Day 134 is, of course, the very beginning of week 19. And with the beginning of week 19, we have heard some incredible pieces of news today, both jarring, exciting, and also jubilant in their source. And of course, we're going to be covering it all tonight. And I have to say that the news has kind of been stalling. There's not been a lot going on in Ukraine for a while that has been of considerable note rather than the fall of Lysychansk. Tonight, we have three major pieces of news to cover. And I say three. We have some news from Belarus. We also have some news about something that was actually confirmed today by the Russian command. And finally, we have some news coming from Snake Island, and that's going to be pretty large tonight. And so with that, let's go over the schedule. Y'all don't know how much I'm chomping at the bits to get to all this stuff tonight because it's unbelievable. I'm not even going to tell y'all what it is, but it's huge. So tell your friends, tell your family, post this on Facebook because we've got three large things to cover today, and two of them are incredible. One of them's a little bit nerve-wracking. Anyways, we're actually going to be starting off tonight at Snake Island. Once we cover the news at Snake Island, we're then going to be moving into our location unknowns. After we cover the Snake Island news and the location unknowns, we're then going to be moving up to Russia. But before we get to Russia, we're going to answer three questions from the chat. After we answer those three questions from the chat, we're then going to get to the massive news within Russia, and we'll also cover the remainder of the Russian news, both in Moscow, Novgorod, and also Belgorod as well. We'll also be moving into the Kharkiv and northern Donbass area and covering the news there as well. After we cover all of that news, we're then going to take another pause in the Donetsk area to answer three questions from the chat once again. And after we answer those three questions, we'll then be moving on to the southern front to cover all of the news that we've gotten through here, which is about 5 pieces today. We'll also be covering a brawl that occurred between Ukrainian officials in Odessa today that was shown in the short summary. We'll be showing that again here on the news tonight. It's interesting, and we'll of course be trying to figure out why later on. And then after that, we'll be moving on to the international news around the world, both in the headquarters of the European Union in Brussels, and also in the capital of Ireland, which is Dublin. After that, we'll then be moving to Belarus to cover the third large piece of news for the night. And after we cover that massive bit of news, we'll then return to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Zelenskyy. I also forgot to mention before we get to the location unknowns, there is a small piece of news that came out Bucha today that we will be covering before we get there. So with that, it's time to start off this incredible night of news. And to start it all off, I said that I never thought this would happen. And I was wrong. And one of the first times ever, one of my predictions was flat wrong. And I'm incredibly excited and ecstatic that it was wrong. A lot of people asked me when the Russians withdrew from Snake Island, would the Ukrainians ever go out there and do anything, like just set up a flag? And I said most likely not, because it's an incredibly dangerous trek. The Black Sea Fleet is still out there and could destroy any Ukrainian vessels that try and reach the island. Somehow, a brave crew of Ukrainian soldiers and sailors set off on a boat from the Ukrainian coastline and chugged their way down to Snake Island today to set up the Ukrainian blue and yellow banner. And we saw that flag flying over the island itself today on film in 2 separate videos. And here is the first one. And I wanted to show this one first because you can see the rocky outcroppings on the edge of the island, confirming that this is Snake Island and the Ukrainians are back. The Russians didn't just withdraw from the island, the Ukrainians have now returned and planted the Ukrainian blue and yellow banner back on the island. It is a symbolic victory. Strategically, it does not offer much, but it is a symbolic one. This was actually the first bit of land that the Russians took in its entirety at the very start of this war, and 7 out of the 13, I guess you could call them soldiers that were on the island, were killed in a Russian bombardment by the Moskva and the Vasily Baikov. Of course, over the course of the war, we do know that the Moskva is now sitting at the bottom of the sea, probably was a couple of hundred men dead on board, and a whole bunch of Russian weapons, and a whole bunch of Russian hopes and dreams that went down with it. But we can see the Ukrainian soldiers walking around the island, the flag in the background, probably absorbing the symbolic victory that they've just had here, and it is a huge symbolic victory for certain. It is impressive, it's beautiful, and I gotta say, this was the start to a great night tonight in terms of news. But man, look at that. I never thought we would see it during the entirety of this war, a Ukrainian flag flying over Snake Island again, but there it is right there. Impressive is all I've got to say. And I'm just going to let y'all see this flag for a couple of more seconds before the video ends. And that's the end of the video, but we have another one. The second video does not show the shoreline, which is why I wanted to show the first one, so that way we could confirm that that is certainly Snake Island where this flag is. And we can now see the Ukrainian soldiers that planted the flag on this island giving an address saying that the flag will never be taken down and Ukraine will take all of its land. I'm going to let y'all listen to the speech. There is a speech to translate, speech to text translation below. I'm so excited I can hardly speak, but here's the video.
Цей прапор так само буде піднятий на півострові. Півострів також був наш і завжди буде нашим. Слава Україні! Героям слава! Перемога український! Ми повернемо вас, будь ласка, українські! Слава Україні! Слава захисникам Азовсталі!
It's unbelievable, really. I mean, like, I'm sitting here even trying to process it myself. And I don't even know how they got out there. I do know that the Ukrainians own a large amount of smaller boats. And when I say boats, they're literally boats. I don't know how they got out there, considering that the Russian Black Sea Fleet is still within striking range of the island, as far as we know. So what a daunting trip by the Ukrainian soldiers that went out there just to set up this flag. And if they just set up the flag and go back, I can't blame them, because it is a very dangerous position they're in on that island. But what a crazy story they're going to have to tell their kids when they get through this entire war and it's over. They're going to be able to tell their kids that they went back to the very island that at the start of this war was the symbol of Ukrainian resistance, and plant the flag back on it 134 days into this war, and show that Ukraine will never yield, and the land that Ukraine has lost to the Russians will, in time, become Ukrainian again. It's a very impressive thing to see. And I do hope that we continue to see more Ukrainian flags raised over places that the Russians have long since taken. Hopefully, this sight will be repeated in cities like Kherson, Melitopol, Mariupol, Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, Donetsk, Luhansk, and maybe even Sevastopol. Maybe, only time will tell, but it's an impressive start to tonight's news. And with that, we're now going to be moving out of the area of Snake Island, and we're now going to be moving on into the Bucha hostile European area, where we've also gotten some more interesting news. And when I say interesting, it is interesting in a bit of a morbid way. Apparently, there were sympathizers in the Bucha hostile European area that did support the Russian cause, and not only did they support it, apparently they inflicted it upon the rest of their own people. Much like the story of Jewish sympathizers in the German ghettos that were set up during World War II, this specific Ukrainian citizen, according to reports, supported the Russians to the point that he actually walked around kind of as a quasi-police man, beating other citizens and threatening them with reprisals. And so they've now found out who this man was, and they're now raiding his house to arrest him and hold him accountable for the crimes that he's committed against his own people. A traitor to his country, and hopefully he'll be remembered as that in the courts. Here's the video. We can now see some pictures inside of the apartment. I mean, you see the blurred out face of the man who apparently perpetrated these crimes. We can also see different forms of identification.
Розглянувши матеріали кримінального провадження, внесеного до єдиного реєстру досудових розслідувань від 21.03.2023 2022 року. Вручаю вам підозру у вчиненні злочину, передбаченого частиною 2 статті 111 Кримінального кодексу України.
He's now having his
тобто вчиненні
charges read out
державної
against
зради,
him, as well as his rights.
діянні, умисно вчиненому громадянином України на шкоду суверенітетові територіальної цілісності та недоторканості, обороноздатності державній, економічній чи інформаційній безпеці України, а саме перехід на бік ворога в період воєнного стану. Ознайомтеся, будь ласка. Слідчими Головного слідчого управління Національної поліції спільно з оперативниками Департаменту карного розшуку за процесуального керівництва Офісу Генерального прокурора було викрито мешканця міста Кривого Рогу, якому виповнилось 62 роки, який 26 лютого 2022 року прибув до міста Бучі Київської області, де під час окупації російськими військовими перейшов на бік ворога. Останнім було здійснено публічну підтримку агресії проти України, здійснював також заклики мешканців міста Бучі до покори та прийняття руського міру. Також останній погрожував мешканцям фізичною розправою та надавав інформацію Збройним силам Російської Федерації стосовно обстановки у місті. Також даний чоловік знаходив місця та надавав їх Збройних силах Росії. Ці місця були найбільш вигідними для ведення вогню, щоб в подальшому знищувати військових Збройних сил України. Даного чоловіка затримано в порядку статті 208 Кримінально-процесуального кодексу України та оголошено підозру за частиною 2 статті 111 Кримінального кодексу України, а саме в державній зраді. Санкція статті передбачає 15 років позбавлення волі або довічне позбавлення волі з конфіскацією майна. Наразі вирішується питання щодо обрання останньому запобіжного заходу у вигляді тримання під вартою.
And it's the end of the video. But of course, the Ukrainian policeman there, which I was not wanting to interrupt for our Ukrainian viewers who can't understand the language, is pretty much describing the crimes that the man's committed, the process that they're most likely going to be taking him through to find him guilty or not guilty. Of course, he's most likely guilty. But what's very interesting to me is that while this war has continued, usually during wars and extreme instances like this, states of emergencies, sometimes civil proceedings are suspended, and also basic rights are also suspended. That is the case here in the United States. During the Civil War, some basic rights were suspended, like habeas corpus. However, it seems like the Ukrainians have not been doing that, which I have to say is quite the high road for them, and that is, of course, adding a little extra level of administrative burden to their government, as they're still trying to make sure that people have trials for their crimes, and they're found guilty or not guilty. Of course, Ukrainian courts do work much differently than American courts. They work more like a Russian court, but hopefully this man will be brought forward for his crimes and hopefully given a proper sentence for them if found guilty. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Kyiv area, where we've seen some pretty interesting news, and we've also seen the Ukrainian government taking the initiative to take out sympathizers and make sure that they will be brought forward for their crimes. And some people were asking, what was the similarity and what was I saying about the Jewish ghetto statement? If y'all didn't know, a little bit of a history story. During the Holocaust, pretty much as a by and large story, the Germans would set up ghettos in cities that had large Jewish populations. They would cram all of the Jews into a ghetto, which is where they would live until they were taken to a camp. And there were a couple of Jews in every single ghetto that would sympathize with the Germans, whether by choice or not is not the question. But they would sympathize with the Germans, and they would actually become somewhat of a quasi-police force that would beat their own people and also torture them and do other nasty things to them, and also help to load them onto the trains that would then bring them to the camps. And that was the comparison I was making, is that this man is very similar in principle to a sympathizer, a Nazi sympathizer in a Jewish ghetto. Also, as another comparison, just to make sure that we have a broad field of comparisons, it's also very similar to French sympathizers in Vichy, France, who sent off tens of thousands of able-bodied French men to Germany to pretty much work as forced labor, And also, they pretty much starved out a large amount of France during the war by limiting them to an intake of around 1,500 to 1,250 calories a day, which is almost half of what a normal full-grown adult should be eating on average. So with that, now that the history story's out of the way, and y'all know what I was saying about the comparison there, we're now going to be moving on into the location unknowns. And we have some pretty interesting ones today. Starting off, we can see a Russian with one arm in the army. There's a lot of jokes you can make on that single line right there, and I don't think this is showing what the Russians want to show. So here's the video. We can see that this man is firing the RPG with one arm. He does not have another arm, and they've mounted the RPG on a tripod for him to use it. He then fires the RPG, and then the video will cut to the next clip. We can now see the man only has one arm, and is taking a crew of men to help him to do his job. And I don't know what the Russians are trying to show here, that this man was wounded previously in combat and they forced him back onto the front lines and they're trying to act like he's happy there, or if this man did not have an arm in the first place and then they pushed him into the service. Regardless, having both of your arms is a basic requirement of military service in most countries around the world, and I don't think this is really sending the image that the Russians would want to send. They're literally putting people who are certainly not fit for military service on the front and making them fight, and even giving them a crew of people to make sure that they can do something. I don't know what kind of image this is supposed to be sending, but it's not a good one, that's for sure. Now, I did see Duda Lebowski. I would like to say this. He says we have an active army ranger without a leg. That's true, but the thing is that you never pull the trigger of a gun or level a gun with your toes on your feet. You do it with both of your hands. And so the man can't even work a normal firearm if he had to without assistance from someone else, which will get him killed incredibly quickly on a front line. Now, I'm not trying, of course I want to make it clear. I'm not trying to say and bash the guy for not having an arm. What I'm saying, though, is that the Russian military should have never put this kind of man in a position where he's supposedly still fighting on the front lines with one arm. He can't do anything without assistance. He's a hindrance to his unit, he's a hindrance to himself, and he's making himself a liability and a danger on the front lines. I just saw a hat guy say something pretty funny, but we won't say that one. I don't want to rat on the guy too much. He can't really help. He's missing an arm, but damn, I can't believe the Russian army would put someone out there on the front lines that only has one arm. It's like they're seriously having a manpower shortage, which we'll be covering after the location unknown news. It's unbelievable. There's not really much for me to add rather than what I said, and we're just watching this video of them having to help this guy out. He can't do anything. They're literally having to carry around a team of 2 people to help him out. What type of advantage is this giving them? It's not giving them an advantage. It's like pushing a guy onto the front line who's probably already been injured in this current war, again for no reason rather than just the symbolism of it. Of we're not letting any man leave the line unless if they're dead. With that, that's the end of the video, but a terrible display of how little the Russians actually care. And while the image of this video, if we actually were able to hear them, they may have been saying something like, oh, this guy didn't have an arm, but he still wanted to serve, and so we let him into the army. The army, at a point, has to say, an army that actually has sense and reason in it, has to eventually say, I'm sorry, man, but if you're missing a whole arm, you can't join the military, because you can't do basic things. That would seem like a normal thing to say. If you're missing a leg, you can serve, you can do that fine, because legs don't, you you don't do as much mechanically complex with your legs. They're used for walking or running. That's really the only two things that your legs are used for. Arms, on the other hand, you have to tie shoes, put on clothes, level guns, reload them, which you have to do with two hands. Driving vehicles, you have to have two hands. Operating anything inside of a vehicle, usually two hands. You have to have two arms to do most of the the basic functions in the military. And so I don't know why they would allow someone with only one arm to serve. It seems pretty sick to me. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainian SBU destroying tanks at night. Apparently, according to the video title, and we'll see if this is true, they destroyed two T-80 tanks, pretty good, a T-72 tank, pretty decent, and a BMP-2, which is a normal run-of-the-mill kind of vehicle. We can see here that they're going to keep a tally of the vehicles that they destroyed, and we can see that they've already taken out the first T-80. They're now moving further down the line to the next tank that's perfectly spaced out on the tree line, and they're now going to drop the second bomblet, which then takes out the second T-80. Now they've moved on to take out the T-72, and it looks like it may be a T-72B3, but based by that explosion, I think it's become past tensed. And now they're taking out the BMP-2. Quite the little score there. They took out 30% of a BTG's tank force and also an armored personnel carrier. Hopefully the Ukrainians are able to keep on bringing on these kinds of losses to the Russians, because the next big bit of news that we're going to be covering later on tonight is going to let y'all know that apparently the Russians are out of steam, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Moving on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, we can then see a Russian tank exploding. Nothing new here on the channel, and especially nothing new during the war, but we can see... Actually, correction, this is actually a different video. Apparently it was titled wrong. Ukrainian artillery is about to chase these Russians around this town. They're going to move from building to building, trying to evade the artillery. But of course, with the Ukrainian artillery being as pinpoint as it is, it pretty much lands on top of them each and every time. And they just have to keep running around the city in circles, trying to avoid the artillery fire. And so, here's the video. When you see the Russians moving into a building with a red roof, when you see a car there, it appears to be some kind of a garage. When you now see some smoke coming from the other side, showing that artillery may have landed, and the troops now appear to be on the run, as the artillery is getting close, and they're trying to find another place to go, so that way they're not in the middle of it. A decently common sense move for the most part. You now see them moving further down the fence line, and now they've gathered near a red gate. Well, blue gate, sorry, I'm not colorblind. Sorry. We now see artillery landing around where they once were just a second ago, and it appears that the Russians are already on the move again. We can see one guy here in this orchard moving through. The artillery is not giving them a break. They're still trying to move, and the artillery is just traveling down this row of houses with them. We can now see them moving through the blue gate into the other side of the street, which I'm supposing they're thinking this will save them. But of course, the Ukrainian artillery will just follow them to the other side of the street, and the cycle of fear continues. So we can see the Ukrainian artillery there, of course, going to work and showing us that excellent accuracy that everyone takes for granted at this point. 134 days of seeing Ukrainian artillery hit dead on its mark gets to where you just expect that to be the case. But when you really think about it, for an artillery piece to be miles away and hitting dead onto these Russians to the point that they have to keep on running from place to place and building to building, does give us a pretty good idea that they're fairly accurate, more so than the average military. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see another Javelin being fired, and we're starting to see more Javelins being used as the war goes on. And so, let's hop over to Twitter, and here's the video. Of course, I'm going to have to mute it. Well, you see the man aiming the Javelin here, getting it ready to fire. Of course, the Javelin is made in Alabama, which I'm very proud of as an Alabamian, knowing that our weapons that we produce here are fairly good. They've now fired the Javelin. It's now on the way towards a Russian tank in the distance. I don't know where it is yet, but I'm sure we're about to see it, and I think it was right there, down there at the bottom of the hill. And it looks like it was, as the plume's coming off of the tank, and it's been destroyed by the Javelin, at a pretty close range, actually. We can now see the Javelin gunner down in the trench, and of course, if we could hear, they put a lot of copyrighted music over the stuff, so of course you couldn't hear them talk, but I'm sure they were cheering and celebrating the hit that they just got. So it's great to see that the Javelins, 4.5 months into this war, still have enough ammunition to be used pretty regularly as far as we can confirm on video. And so with that, we are on to the next bit of Location Unknown news. The next bit, we can see a Special Forces buggy moving around the countryside. Buggies are always fun, especially whenever you take them out mudding, which I bet a lot of y'all do know about, so I won't explain that one. But they're also fun as weapons of war, and we can see the Ukrainians learning this up front, up close, and in person. Of course, copyrighted music playing, but a nice little buggy, I gotta say, really impressed, and they also did a very nice paint job with the camo. With that, that's the end of the video. And also, look at the little like paint job that they did on the back of this guy's helmet. I'm assuming it's not a sticker. It looks like it may be painted on. And if it was, what skill? I can't paint like that. And so whoever did that, I envy them, because I wish I could paint something like that. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next video, but that was a really cool look at a little Special Forces buggy, and we're now starting to see those used more and more often. We see them mounting anti-tank guided missiles onto them, we see them mounting machine guns, and just using them for normal reconnaissance activities, which is a very good way to use these kinds of buggies, and they are acclimated to the Ukrainian ground, with the wide wheels that, of course, you can deflate for off-roading. Even during the Rasputitsa season, these buggies may be able to move at incredible speeds and cover a large amount of ground. And so hopefully, when the Rasputitsa comes in a few months, we'll see the Ukrainians and the reconnaissance abilities never being hindered, as they are using a massive amount of buggies. Moving on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, we can see an intercepted phone call. The Ukrainians made some animations for this, and this was from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine's Twitter page. So I'm just going to let y'all see this. It speaks for itself, and it's pretty funny. And so, here's the video.
Ну и чё, расскажи там, чё нового, как дела? Наши там уже с ума сходят на передке, пиздец, ебать. Почему? Ну их каждый день бомбят, нахуй. Каждый день просто, ебать. Приехал, короче, блядь, туда, пацанам, на передок. И теперь они там, во-первых, все, блядь, уже деды стали, нахуй. Во-вторых, ебать, я теперь как зайцы по норам, понял? Вот только где-то что засвистело, все, и фук, ебать, они уже контури. Зайцы позавидуют, ебать. Постарели, да, ребятки? В смысле, они там кукушка есть, чтобы ты понимал, они там уже, блядь, еще там, ну, кукушка, в смысле, едет. Вот просто представь на секунду, ебать, 24/7, ебать, тебя, нахуй, блядь, просто бомбят. Там, где они находятся, ебать, там, блядь, жесткие бои идут. И вот, блядь, кто они такие, что они там делают, понимаешь, может, они ночью, ебать, ебашут с нами, нахуй, днем они, блядь, типа мирные люди ездят на машине. Здесь вообще никому нельзя доверять, вообще абсолютно. Может бабка идти, нахуй, с пирожками, нахуй, блядь. Понимаешь, что, ебать? Ну да, да. А ночью это, ебать, полковник, нахуй, корректировщик артиллерии, блядь.
Oh, man. Okay, so a couple of things about the phone call, moving beyond the funny animations. First thing, I love the noises that he made for the rabbits, because he said they're like rabbits and they go choo choo. And let's listen to that one more time, because that was really funny, and that gave me a pretty good laugh. Anyways, to summarize the phone call, pretty much this Russian, like we've heard on many phone calls, and I threw this one up because it was entertaining for one. Of course, we can't really confirm the validity of it, but it was entertaining to say the least, and so I did show it just for the laughs at best. But man, it was just funny to hear this guy talking, and also the animations. But of course, like every other Russian that's ever put in a phone call that we've heard, they're saying that they're having a pretty tough time in the front lines, and it's hell on earth. So with that, nice to hear that from a Russian. We're now going to be moving on to our last bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see Patron, the bomb-sniffing dog, visited a children's hospital today. He's become a huge celebrity, especially amongst the kids, and we can see that he is enjoying his celebrityship by traveling around the country on tour. And so here's the video of Patron, the bomb-sniffing dog, in Ukraine.
Патрон лохматиці.
You see him walking around, enjoying the sights and the sounds, and all the kids who adore this dog, and all the people in general.
Для собаки це дуже почесно. Одна з таких нагород – це медаль від президента України Володимира Зеленського. Інша нагорода – він вже так.
Дітки Охмадиту
Now we see him
намалювали
posing with the kids.
Патрона.
Of course, being the great dog he is, and the cutest dog that we've ever seen in this war.
До зустрічі з Патроном.
You know, the Russians would have a field day with this dog. At day, you pass him and he looks like a dog, and then at night he's a bomb-sniffing dog diffusing our minds. You know, but anyways, it's great to see that Patron has become a huge celebrity and an inspiration to people and children all around the nation of Ukraine, and he's now taking victory laps around the country after defusing thousands of bombs and letting people know that even the dogs in Ukraine are doing their part to help out in the war effort. And so, of course, a wonderful video to see, and that wraps up our Location Unknown news. We're now going to be moving out of the Location Unknown news and into the second massive bit of news we've gotten for tonight, which will actually pop us down into Luhansk for a second to cover another bit of news that does confirm what we've heard. But before we get there, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we're about to move into probably the biggest news of the night, what the thumbnail was about, and what the title was about as well. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and we are starting round 1 of the question segment for the night. And first up, we have a $40 super chat from White Lightning 777, who says, "Will Ukraine get the extended range HIMARS?"
Not that we know of right now. I know that's probably the big news you were looking for, but sadly we haven't heard about it. Now, I'm hoping that they will, because if they got the long-range HIMARS, you could put a HIMARS so far behind the lines that it wouldn't be able to be hit by any kind of Russian artillery whatsoever, and it could also reach out and touch anything and everything that is either inside of Russia, near the front lines, which of course would not be allowed by the United States, or inside of Ukraine, anywhere in occupied territory. That could also reach out and include Crimea as well. And so, sadly, no, we haven't heard about that, but maybe in the future that will be something that the United States does give. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. I hate to say it, but the answer to that is no. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question, but I thank you once again for the wonderful support, because that does help us to keep on running this channel, so we can hopefully get to the day when long-range HIMARS rockets will be given to Ukraine. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
All right, and moving on, we have a $30 super chat from Praise Adonai, who says, "Enforcer and Matt, Russia is concerned over the defense of the Kerch Bridge. I'm an engineer once involved with these bridges. I believe it would take at least a 5 kiloton or KLB bomb. The U.S. has used such a bomb with an F-35. Can Ukraine do it? Ideas?"
I think that they could. Now, I don't know the explosive yield of a single cruise missile, but let's pull that up. Let's just go for just the run-of-the-mill Tochka. Let's pull that up. Of course, the Tochka does not have the range to hit the bridge, but let's see the explosive yield of a single Tochka. Mass diameter warhead. Chemical, a nuclear warhead. Well, we don't really want the 100 kiloton nuclear warhead now, do we? No. So let's see if we can find anything about the normal explosive filler that the Ukrainians could use. Oh, man, it doesn't tell us. That sucks. Tochka explosive yield. Let me see if that will give us an answer. It launches a 482 kilogram warhead, so it's not really big. It's pretty much a 500 kilogram bomb. So it would take about 10 Tochkas hitting the same spot on the bridge to take it out. And of course, Tochkas always do not hit their mark dead on. And so a lot of them would miss. And so you'd have to have a massive amount of Tochkas to try and take out the bridge. But there could be other missiles out there that could destroy that bridge. Or, I'm trying to think of how it could be done. A HIMARS rocket would definitely not have the explosive yield to take out a bridge. It would take loads of them over probably the course of several days of barrages to take out the bridge. I'm trying to think, if it takes 5,000 pounds of explosives, gosh, that's really hard to think about, because there's not a lot of weapons out there in the world that just come with 5,000 pounds of explosives attached. maybe 2 or 3 JDAMs would do the job. You know, that's something that could be considered. But I can't think of anything right now in the Ukrainian arsenal or anything that could even be given to Ukraine that could do that kind of job in one fell swoop or with a couple of barrages. So with that, I'm sadly going to say I don't think the Ukrainians have the ability now, but considering, and I'm glad that you've been paying attention to this as well, considering that the Russians have been preparing the bridge for something, testing out smoke screens, and also putting radar deflectors around the bridge, that is showing that apparently the Russians are scared that the Ukrainians may have the ability now to hit the bridge, or they may be getting the ability, and they're trying out everything as much as possible to see what may protect the bridge from a Ukrainian attack, or at least hinder them from being completely successful. So with that, I thank you once again for the support, and I hope that does kind of answer the question, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that could actually destroy that bridge. Now, you said an F-35 with a 5,000-pound bomb, but I'm highly certain that the United States is never going to send over any aircraft whatsoever, regardless of what kind, and on top of that, especially one that would be used to attack the Crimean bridge, because the United States has already given a prerequisite to the HIMARS systems, saying that they cannot be used on Russian soil, you know, fired onto Russian soil, and I don't know if that includes the Crimea area as well, and that kind of, you know, rule of engagement, I guess you could say. And so with that, thank you once again. Sorry I couldn't answer the question too well, but with that, we're going to move on to the next question. Hopefully, everyone can brainstorm something that will be able to take out that bridge that the Ukrainians could get and use. So aircraft are out of the question, but anything else is on the table, hopefully. And so with that, we're going to move on to the final question of this segment. But before we move on to the big news of the night, the whopper, the news that everyone is going to be cheering for. And so with that, we're on to the last question of this segment.
All right, and the final super chat of the segment goes to Kaltenberg, who puts in a $20 donation and says, Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini. And thank you once again for the support, Kaltenberg. You support our stream every single night, and it helps us out a lot in making sure that we can keep these streams running and make sure to report this news daily. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support, and we're now going to move out of the question segment to the news that everyone's been looking forward to tonight and has been wondering, what is the massive bit of news that we've gotten? Now, I'm so excited. I'm going to have to try and calm myself down here because I'm about to be jumping out of my skin. The Ukrainians were pushed out of the city of Lysychansk a couple of days ago, and I said that they were most likely going to be on the retreat to a more defensible location, which may be miles away from Lysychansk, and we may see this entire finger, what still exists in a way, disappear. That's what I said a few days ago. It appears that the Russian military, the Russian units that pushed the offensive here in the Lysychansk and Severodonetsk area, have now completely exhausted their energy, their supplies, and their ability to push an offensive, and it's been made official by the Russian government that the Russian forces there are going to be put onto a complete halt to quote-unquote rest. Now, we did hear that yesterday, but today we finally got an official video showing Vladimir Putin himself say the words that the Russian army in Lysychansk will stop, completely halt their operations to rest, meaning that those units are so exhausted that continuing on an offensive could be disastrous. And so, I'm going to show y'all this video, and it's unbelievable. The Russian military has ground to a halt in every single front in this war. Here's the video, and there's a speech-to-text translation to boot.
Подразделения, принимавшие участие в активных боевых действиях и добившиеся успеха, победы на Луганском направлении, безусловно, должны отдохнуть, нарастить свои боевые возможности, а другие воинские соединения, включая и группировку «Восток», группировку «Запад», должны выполнять свои задачи по ранее утвержденным планам, по единому замыслу. И надеюсь, что все будет на их направлениях происходить так же, как и на Луганском происходило до настоящего времени.
Dang, I'm actually pretty excited about this. And I see a lot of people saying, do you trust the Russians? And the thing is that this is being worded in a way that makes it sound like this is a congratulations to the soldiers for taking the city and they're going to rest. And there's no reason that the Russians should trick the Ukrainians in this way, it's showing a weakness. And usually in a war, sometimes you can lure people into a trap with the idea of the forces there being weak. But the Ukrainians, of course, are getting satellite images and pictures from the United States daily, as far as we know, showing the actual condition of Russian forces all over the front lines, all over the country. And so in that regard, I do not think this is a trick. I think that they're honestly trying to word this because there's going to be a lack of news coming out of the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area following this massive victory that the Russians are, of course, trying to project all over their TVs. And these units were almost on the brink of failure when they were taking Lysychansk. They had been exhausted beyond recognition. And we were kind of getting that idea because the Russian forces were almost hardly coherent in their movements. We would see a large push to the south, and then it would get repelled and it would stop for about a week. Then we would see a push up here, and usually it ended up with one concerted push, and one that was finally put together. It would break through the Ukrainian lines by about a mile, and that one penetration of the line would lead the Ukrainians to have to withdraw back out of Severodonetsk and then eventually out of Lysychansk due to the situation. And if the Ukrainians were just able to hold on for another 2 weeks in this area, we may have seen the Russians have to give up on the Lysychansk offensive. It was that close. Now, this is, of course, all based off of what we're knowing right now, but we also got news from the Lysychansk area itself that the Russian units have ground to a halt. And I know that a lot of people are saying this does not make any sense for the Russians, this could be a trap, but I'm going to give a little bit of historical context. At the evacuation of Dunkirk, the German army, which was about to encircle the French and the British that had a small enclave here around the city of Dunkirk, were about to encircle them, but then they stopped. We have no reason or no explanation of why the German army actually stopped at that point, because the British and the French that were in that pocket were the most vulnerable they had ever been. But one decent assumption as to why that may have happened is that the German army did not have enough supplies to continue on an offensive into Dunkirk itself and wipe out the British army, well, the British Expeditionary Force, and so they had to stop for a bit to try and make sure that their units were able to regain their cohesion and their supplies, and then push the offensive once more. You may also know that in World War I, after the era of the frontier, which was in the first months of the war in 1914, both sides started to run out of ammo, and German offensives ground to a halt during the winter and the early spring of 1914. These kinds of precedents show that the Russian military at this point, right now, this very day, were almost on the brink of collapse at Lysychansk. The Ukrainians were so freaking close to actually winning the Battle of Lysychansk. It was literally within their grasp, and sadly, due to some unfortunate circumstances, they had to withdraw from the city and they lost the battle. Now that the Russian units are officially resting, the Ukrainians, of course, can bombard them with a massive amount of artillery, if possible, large amounts of drone strikes. The units will most likely be stationary. They will move around a little bit, probably shifting a couple of miles north or south or east to west along the front lines. But by and large, the Russians are at their most vulnerable right now in the area, and this rest period is the Russians trying to regroup the units, bring back their cohesion, of course, give them supplies to continue on an offensive with in the future, and we may have seen the Lysychansk and Severodonetsk area fizzle out for the next couple of weeks, until the Russians are able to get their act together and maybe try and start another offensive, or until the Ukrainians start a counterattack and try and push the Russians back into Lysychansk or back all the way to Kherson or Popasna. We'll have to wait and see what happens in this area, but we also got a news post today, which is one of the few times I've ever done this, that actually did confirm that the Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov announced on the 7th, which is today, that the Russian forces in Ukraine are pausing to rest and regain their combat capabilities, confirming the assessment that the Russian forces had initiated an operational pause. In fancy terms, well, in simple terms, what this fancy wordage is saying is that the Russian military has exhausted all of its energy, all of its supplies, and its ability to carry on, and so they're going to have to stop for a while to try and regain the initiative. And I can't wait to see what the next days hold for all of us. I'm more than excited to see this. I'm happy to hear it. But with that, you know that the Russians, even showing that they are incredibly weak in this regard, considering that an offensive this small, and I have to give y'all a context again, the Kharkiv offensive that surrounded just the northern part of the ring road was larger than the entire Severodonetsk and Lysychansk pocket, even at its biggest. Yet, the Russians have to take a break on this offensive, and it gives you an idea of how worn out their military is. And even with it being that worn out and being that clear to the world that the Russians are no superpower at all, the Russians still have to stir the pot and cause problems. And just for a lot of people in the United States who are most likely well-intentioned, but they aren't really in the right mind, we can see today that the Russians have decided to pick a fight with the United States. Some of y'all may know Russian history, and some of y'all may also know that a man named Seward here in the United States bought Alaska from Russia per penny. It was like 2 cents an acre. It was an extraordinary deal, and it was useless land that the Russians would never be able to use, and so they sold it off, and then we found oil there, and the Russians have regretted that decision ever since. But much like the Western ambitions of Russia to pretty much reclaim all of the former Russian imperial lands, they're also now putting their eyes on Alaska as well. And we saw a billboard today in Russia saying that Alaska is ours. Here's the picture of that billboard. Alaska, or as it says in Russia, Aliska Nasha, which means Alaska is ours. Boy, are these people goofy or what? They can't even win a war with Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine's doing an extraordinary job, but when we actually look at them as a comparison to the rest of the world, they don't have a large military budget, and their military on paper is not as impressive as, say, the Polish, or as another example, even the Turks. Yet, the Russians are going to pick a fight with the United States now, and now they're going to act like their claims also extend to Alaska. I don't know what they're thinking anymore. But they've lost their minds, because if they ever tried to do anything with Alaska, first off, there's not even a population over here, or a port large enough to support any kind of Russian offensives to take Alaska. And I don't even know what the goal of this is, rather than to show that they have no one's interests at mind here in the United States. And I would like to make that clear, because I have heard some arguments, of course, on the mainstream news, I won't say where, but they're always talking about the Russians are actually the American citizens' friends, and they're looking out for them, and they actually care for America in their own way. But how do they care for America when they're literally wanting to take Alaska from us? I would say that doesn't care for us at all, and I'm sure, and I hate to say this because, it's a sad thing, but I'm actually certain that there are some Americans out there that would sell off Alaska to Russia by the penny per acre, just to try and act like they're our friends. And they would sell out hundreds of thousands of Americans in Alaska to do that, because there's a large amount of people here in the United States, and don't get me wrong, there's a massive amount of people that support Ukraine in the United States. The overwhelming majority do. But there is a small amount of people out there who actually think that the Russians have our best interests at mind, although the Russians have been a national rival of the United States ever since the early 1900s and onwards. And in that regard, this whole entire billboard is the dumbest thing ever. And at that point, I would challenge the Russians to try and take Alaska and see if they could ever succeed. If the Ukrainians can whip their ass, imagine what the United States would do to them. Speaking of which, I don't even think they have the manpower anymore to try and continue on an offensive, because we saw a recruitment poster for contract soldiers for the Russian army in Nizhny Novgorod today, and it is the saddest poster we've ever seen. This poster is offering 250,000 rubles as a sign-on bonus to people who will sign a contract for the Russian military. Let's put into perspective what 250,000 rubles looks like in American dollars. We'll put it in a rubles to US dollar calculator. 1 Russian ruble is worth 1.5 American cents, an extraordinary amount. We can actually see that's been dropping significantly over the past few days. But if we were to put in 250,000 Russian rubles, that equals $4,333.89 American cents. That's actually a considerable amount for the average Russian, considering that the GDP per capita in Russia, let's see, Russia, where is Russia? Let's type that in real quick. The GDP per capita in Russia per year is $10,000. And so practically what the Russian military is saying is that if you sign up, you will get half of a year's normal pay. And so to put that into American perspective, that would be like a $20,000 sign-on bonus here in the United States to join the military. That's how bad they're suffering for manpower right now. And that gives you an idea of how much further this war can go before Russia has to start pulling out the conscripts. Now, here's the catch, and this does say it in the post. It's a 6-month contract. Here's the thing, though. Once you enter the Russian military is corrupt enough that they'll force these soldiers to re-sign a 4-year contract, and then they'll be in there for the duration of the war, pretty much. That is the catch. And on top of that, they may never see this 250,000 rubles, and by the time they get it, it may be worthless. So, a very interesting little image we're starting to get from Russia. They're not doing well, and on top of that, not only are they not doing well, they're starting to try and pick a fight with the United States directly by saying Alaska is theirs. And I say let them. Honestly, we don't even need the American military to beat the Russians in Alaska. Just make the Russian military go for Anchorage first, and I think the citizens of Anchorage will kill the Russians before anyone else can get to them. Probably through multiple means. And then, of course, the Russians might run into a moose, and if they drive a tank into one of those, the tank will fall apart. Anyways, great to see that the Russians aren't doing too well internally, and we can also see that their offensive has now completely fallen apart, and it was the only offensive they were able to pursue in all of Ukraine. And so with that, on that bombshell of news, we're now going to move away from Nizhny Novgorod and down towards Belgorod, where we saw another cruise missile misfire. This is the second day in a row that we've seen cruise missiles being fired from the Belgorod area, and another one fail. And so here's the video, and from the caption, which I'm not sure if it's true or not, it says that this cruise missile falls on a border village. We never saw that on film, but we did see the rocket going wonky. And so here's the video.
Да, сейчас будет дом.
Она не взлетела. Сейчас вторая летит, смотри, еще летит.
We can see the next missile being launched. And this one, too, decides to go wonky.
Она закрутила.
Вы видели, блядь?
Да. А вот слева.
Что с ней?
Да что ж ты у нас-то спрашиваешь, блядь? Уже второй раз.
I would say that the guidance systems in those cruise missiles are apparently defective. That's the end of the video, but of course great to see more Russian cruise missiles miss their targets. Not only missing their targets, but apparently not even able to fly straight and landing right back where they started, in Russia. So, with love, from Russia to Russia. Signed, the Iskander battery. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Belgorod and into the Kharkiv area, where we've gotten some more interesting news as the 40th Artillery Brigade has once again hit more Russian armor within the Kharkiv salient. Here's the video of them doing the Lord's great work in the Kharkiv salient. The red outline there is showing a Russian tank. We can see that it says Bucha BMP, which means BMP. So sorry for the butchered pronunciation there, but it is a BMP. And we can see that it's no longer a BMP. I guess you could say that the crew BMP'd themselves. The tank's now having some pretty impressive explosions. A little puff and a chuff. And now we can see another BMP. And a Technia Orkiv. So I'm assuming that was an MTLB. It looked like one. And we can now see the artillery raining down on all of them. The Ukrainian artillery does not discriminate amongst armored personnel carrier, BMP, or a tank. It takes it all out all the same, like you can see right there. The scene now changes to an zoomed out view, and we can now see a white phosphorus shell that appears to have flown out of the tree line and into the field. We can now see a Russian T-72 sitting amongst the trees, and it appears that it provided no refuge for the tank, as it's now become a smoldering wreck, and we can now see the video actually rewinding to show us that hit a second time. So with that is the end of that video, but it's great to see the 40th Artillery Brigade once again hitting the Russian forces in the Kharkiv salient and inflicting casualties that we certainly know now the Russians will not be able to replace. With that in mind, we don't have any more news from the Kharkiv salient. Of course, no offensive or defensive action has happened there whatsoever from either sides, and the front line has remained stable. Moving on further down, of course, we have nothing to report from the Chuhuiv or Balaklia area, as well as the Izium area, but we did get some unfortunate news today from Kramatorsk as another Russian cruise missile hit the city and caused a considerable amount of damage that we can see here on film. The missile appears to have landed amongst the residential area, busting out windows and causing a massive amount of damage to the small park that all of these buildings share. An unfortunate thing to see, but hopefully no one was wounded or killed in that attack. Which, considering that it hit in the middle of that park, it may be likely that people got wounded but did not die, and I hope that is the case. With that, we're now going to be moving up to the front near the Lyman area, where we've seen Ukrainian artillery chasing around the Russians. And we've actually seen this video before. Apparently it's a duplicate. For some reason, every once in a while, Google My Maps will clone a link and then move it over into another one. I've tried to figure out how that happens, because I'm always putting in the correct link whenever I do it, but somehow Google My Maps is Google My Maps. And so sadly, we've seen this video already, and so we see that Ukrainian artillery is doing a good job on the Russians near the Lyman area. And with that, we're now going to be moving towards Lysychansk. We're at the village of Seversk today. We did see Russian artillery firing near the village. But keep in mind, these artillery barrages no longer resemble Russian advances and don't show offensive activity anymore, because the Russian forces have ground to a halt in this area, completely exhausted, and no longer having the ability nor the will to push forward. Man, today's been a good day. I don't know about y'all, but I've been thinking about the Ukrainians putting the flag back on Snake Island, and also hearing that the Russian army has completely deprived itself of the ability to carry on is great news to my ears. We see a Russian tank skirting along the tree line out there. Well, actually, that may not be a Russian tank. That may be a Ukrainian tank. I can't really tell you. We can't really identify it because it's so far away. We can't see a Z or the lack of a Z. But that's the end of the video. And we did see Russian artillery landing near Seversk, which does tell us that Ukrainian forces are, of course, not in Lysychansk anymore. They're most likely still setting up defensive positions elsewhere, which we will not get into too much on stream. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our last bit of news from the northern Luhansk area. Before we move on to the southern front news, the Odessa news, as well as the international news, and the next major and somewhat concerning bit of news, which I highly recommend y'all stay around until the end of the stream to see, because it's something that is certainly out of the norm, and is escalating this probably into a global affair. Moving on to the last bit of news in the northern Luhansk area, we did see some helmet cam footage from an LPR soldier. This video seemed to be largely accurate, and it may have been from an actual firefight, and so I'm going to show this to y'all with that in mind. And it's about 8 minutes long, so it's actually a pretty long firefight video as they come. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. You can see the the LPR soldier firing some kind of a grenade launcher, or a rifle. We now see him back out of the dugout. They're now firing back down the trench again. We can hear some techno music running in the background, or some kind of smooth jazz. Now I hear a grenade being launched further down the trench. And also what sounds like fire coming from further down, which tells us that this is an accurate firefight video. We're actually hearing something that sounds similar to return fire for one of the first times ever. Trench warfare can be very slow, especially if you do not have grenades, which is usually the winning factor in a trench. And then you see that apparently these LPR soldiers are lacking grenades because we don't see any of them being used beyond that one rifle slung grenade that we saw early on in the video. We now see them creeping forward through the trench. The trench appears to be somewhat dry, actually. I was about to say muddy, but now that I look at the ground, it's just covered in leaves. It seems to be rather dry. So I don't know where this is, but it's not close to a water table, that's for certain. We're going to rewind that one for a second and take a look at that again. Let me try and see what happened here. So it seems like something hit kind of close to them and threw up some smoke, but we couldn't really hear the sound too well. I think the microphone on this camera is busted, and that's why everything sounds like it's a golf ball being hit. We hear a bullet ricochet and fly off. And we see that these LPR soldiers are not moving incredibly fast. In fact, they're incredibly cautious, which is showing a certain level of fear. We now hear another grenade that was fired. And another one, and now we can see them starting to use grenades, which is, of course, what you're supposed to use in the trench. And unlike Ukrainian videos where the Ukrainians are always just going at it, and I'm actually going to probably cut this video short, unlike the Ukrainians that are always going at it, massive firefights, trying to cover a decent amount of ground if they're on an offensive quickly, the LPR is moving slower than molasses. I would say this is like turtle speed or sloth speed kinds of movement through this trench. We even saw older drone footage of trench warfare happening months ago, and it went way faster than this, regardless whether which side was moving. So I gotta say that my impression from this video is that the LPR is, of course, poorly trained, has very low morale, and they don't really have the carry-through to continue on an offensive like they're doing right here in this trench. I don't know what kind of music this is, but it's kind of annoying, honestly. And I know that some people are going to be saying, oh, you know, they're taking their time, they're clearing their corners and all that stuff. If you read stories from World War I, I'm going to let the video continue while I say this. If you read stories from World War I, trench warfare was incredibly fast. It had to be fast. That's why the Germans came up with the Sosstruppen, which is the stormtroopers, is that you had to have a lot of speed when clearing trenches. If you didn't have a lot of speed, it would be known where you are inside of that trench. Of course, there's nowhere to move rather than through the trench, and so reinforcements would be brought up and you would be wiped out. And so speed is key in a trench, and we see the LPR exhibiting no speed whatsoever in this trench fight. So with that, we're actually going to skip this video. We've watched 4 minutes and 40 seconds of it, which is long enough for me. And we're now going to be moving out of the Luhansk area, knowing that the LPR was there, and it doesn't look like they were doing a very good job at clearing out a trench, considering that trench warfare emphasizes speed, and that certainly didn't have any characteristics of speed in it. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of the northern Luhansk, well, the Luhansk northern Donbass area, and we're now going to start moving down towards the southern front, the Odessa news, the international news, and the big news, the big and somewhat intimidating news, well, not really intimidating, but a little bit suspenseful news from Belarus, and then we'll finally return to Kyiv for the speech from President Zelenskyy. But before we get there, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to move on down into the rest of the news, and that big piece of news that is sitting there up in Belarus. So with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and we are moving into round 2 of the questions segment. And first up, Enforcer, I actually saw in the live chat that somebody had said that the former Prime Minister of Japan was just shot, and I verified it. And yes, it looks like, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce his name. I think it's Shinzo Abe or something like that. The last name I'm not so sure about, but it was for sure he was definitely shot. So that's horrible, and we hope he is okay. Obviously, we'll tell you more about that if we learn more about it. But moving on to the first super chat, we have a $20 donation from Enforcer for President, who says, I saw a PDF today indicating what countries will rebuild Ukrainian cities. Why can't we make Putin pay?
Great question. The reason why we can't make Putin pay is because their economy is so bad that after this war, they might not have any money to pay anything with. But to answer that question seriously, the reason why we can't make Russia repay is that would allow the Russians to have economic tendrils into Ukraine. This war, at the end of the actual fighting and the firing of every shell and bullet there is, will come down to economics, and wars are as equally fought economically as they are militarily. And so for the West to make sure that Ukraine stays Western and Western aligned in interests, they have to make sure that our money circulates through Ukraine. And so us rebuilding the country is actually pretty beneficial. And so in that regard, I hope that does answer the question. We do not want the Russians financing anything in Ukraine, because then they get a foothold again. And just to give an example of that kind of philosophy, the Chinese actually have a kind of like a conquest strategy that they use economically. It allows them to not really take over a country, but have a large stake in controlling them. In the middle of Africa, for example, in Uganda, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and so on, they actually give a large amount of money to these countries to build things like railroad stations, and they'll never be able to repay these kinds of debts. And so then the Chinese go in and say, well, since you can't repay these debts, we're going to control the railway ourselves. And so then the Chinese, as a nation, control the infrastructure and the transportation systems in some of these countries. And that can cause a lot of issues if, per se, the Chinese were to do anything to shut them down. And so that starts to bring in one example, and of course the Chinese have multiple different facets than just trying to control transportation. They also get their tendrils economically involved in many things in some of these countries. This allows them a large amount of control, and if we were to allow the Russians to pay to rebuild Ukraine, it would most likely be done in a way, in the end, regardless of however we tried to word how the money would be sent, it would be done in a way that the Russians would start to have a say over Ukraine again, and that's something that we do not want to have. We want Ukraine to, of course, be Western aligned, and in doing so, we have to make sure that we're the ones rebuilding it. Of course, a lot of people are talking about, oh, the rebuilding sounds expensive, which is something that is true. It will be expensive. But just because Zelenskyy said rebuilding is going to cost $800 billion does not mean that the U.S. has to shill out $800 billion. You could shill out $130 billion, $100 billion, or any amount that the U.S. government's comfortable with, along with many other countries around the world. And even if everyone around the world combined only paid for half of the reconstruction and the damages that have happened to Ukraine, that's still half. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And I thank you very much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from Jose Diaz, who says, "Good evening from Puerto Rico to the Enforcer, Enforcer Matt, and the audience. Gloria Ukrainia."
And I thank you so much for the support. And it is, of course, wonderful to hear that everyone still supports Ukraine and our channel as well as we continue to report the news day in and day out, month by month, as the war keeps going. And so thank you once again for the support, and Slava Ukraini. And with that, I hope I addressed that comment pretty well, and thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the final question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the remainder of the news tonight. And also, I just heard someone say that Shinzo Abe has been confirmed dead by a shotgun. Well, not by a shotgun. He was confirmed dead, shot in the back with a shotgun. We'll be looking into that a little bit tonight. Of course, this is the Ukraine War news stream, but after we answer this question, we're going to pull that up and look into it a little bit because that's major news. And so with that, we're going to answer this last question from the chat, and then we're going to look into that for a second.
Okay, Enforcer, and it appears on Shinzo Abe, it appears that he is not conscious and he is in cardiac arrest. I don't see any news articles saying that he is confirmed deceased, but he is not in good shape if he is not conscious and he's in cardiac arrest. So that is not good at all. Hopefully he makes it through. Hopefully it's not the case that he's already deceased. That would be absolutely horrible. But anyways, the next super chat is from Judo 2001, who puts in a $20 donation and says, "Mr. Lunchtime, I love my shirt, by the way. Likes his Gatorade nipple flavored. I know you blush at that line, but it's still my favorite. Do you think the United Kingdom will keep up the military aid without Boris?"
Well, I thank you very much for the support and also the little comments there. And to answer that question, I think that the United Kingdom will certainly keep up its military support for Ukraine, even when the Prime Minister does resign. Just to talk about that a little bit, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, has declared his resignation today. He will remain Prime Minister until September, but this does give the Conservative and Unionist Party, the main party that is running the government right now, enough time to appoint a successor. So we will be looking at the situation that does evolve as Boris Johnson eventually does get replaced by someone else. But I do not believe for a minute that just because the current Prime Minister is removed from office and a new one replaces him, that the British support will cease. The British public is heavily in support of Ukraine, and for that reason alone, I do believe that support will continue to flow regardless of who's in charge of Britain. Everyone has Ukraine's best interests in mind. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you once again for the support. That is something that, of course, has been weighed on heavily by Ukraine and has worried a couple of Ukrainians in the country, as a change in government could mean the change in policy from the United Kingdom, although I do believe it's highly unlikely. So with that, we're now going to move on from the question segment, and we're going to take a brief moment before we continue on with the Ukraine war news to address some rather concerning news that we've gotten from around the world. As some of y'all did not know, Shinzo Abe used to be the Prime Minister of the Japanese government for a considerable amount of time. He's apparently been shot tonight in the back with a shotgun during his speech, and apparently is in critical condition or dead. We don't know yet, but we're going to pull up the Shinzo Abe news, and I hate that this is not pre-prepared, of course. This is something brand new. Let's try and find a at least trusty news source. We'll go with The Guardian. I hate to go with mainstream news, but let's see. Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is in a state of cardiopulmonary arrest after collapsing while making a speech, with initial reports saying gunshots had been heard shortly before he fell to the ground. The country's longest serving appeared to be bleeding from the chest after being shot behind with a shotgun on Friday morning. Said a man had been taken into custody, but provided no further details. Abe had been in the city of Nara to make a campaign speech ahead of his Sunday's upper house elections. Ooh, I know, of course we have to pay to keep reading, which is really scummy, but it appears that Shinzo Abe has been shot, and he's in critical condition. We will check in on that later on in the night, and I do wish him the best of luck, and I hope that he does manage to get through. He is the longest-serving Prime Minister in Japanese history, which does say a lot about apparently the respect that the Japanese public did give him, considering that the position of Prime Minister in Japan can be rather fickle, and people can leave almost as quick as they enter. So with that, we're going to be moving on back to the Ukraine war news, but I do hope that we do get good news of what has happened to Shinzo, and hopefully he can survive. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the rest of the news for the night in Ukraine, starting off in the city of Mariupol, where we've seen something once again that heavily resembles what the Nazis did in World War II. Well, once again, I'm sorry if I'm sitting here for a second trying to collect my thoughts. Hearing that Shinzo Abe has been shot, of all people, is a little bit of a shock to me, and I'm still trying to think as to why that may have happened. We can see here a picture of a Russian soldier outside of a museum of art in Mariupol dragging away Ukrainian art pieces draped in cloth. This is something very similar to what the Germans did in World War II. They actually stole a large amount of French art and art that was collected from all around the world that was inside of the Louvre during the Second World War, and art from all around any part of the conquered world that they had. And so we can see that the Russians are taking a page right out of the Germans' playbook, and they're now starting to try and steal art from Ukrainian captured land. Hopefully, at the end of the war, the Ukrainians can get this art back, as it's a valuable piece of Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian heritage that could be lost forever if the Russians keep it or attempt to destroy it. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of the Mariupol area, and we're now going to be moving up north to the front lines. We have not heard of a lot of action, but I do believe that the Ukrainians are preparing for something big. And when I say big, I mean big. We can see the Ukrainian forces were repositioning here in this video. And with the way they're repositioning, with the absolute speed and ferocity, one would have to assume that nasty things are about to happen to the Russians. Oh, man. This is pretty funny. This reminds me of the Seven Dwarves walking off to the mines. With that, that's the end of the video, but I do believe that the Ukrainians are going to be up to something big, considering that these forces are repositioning. That was actually the Azov Battalion, if y'all did not know, as well. With that, we actually have no news to report in all seriousness from the Zaporizhzhia front line. It appears that it has fallen largely silent, and we don't have any news to confirm that either side is going to be continuing an offensive or a defensive. I'd also like to remind y'all of one thing, revisiting Putin's speech from earlier, which we're going to watch again just so that way I can show y'all this, and then link it all together in a big circle. We're going to skip forward a little bit to the important part, because listening to this guy talk is like listening to the flu. They must rebuild their combat capabilities. The other military formations in the east and the south should continue their tasks. What tasks? What tasks? We don't see the Russians doing anything in the east beyond what happened in Lysychansk. Nothing has been happening here, and nothing has been happening in the south. So what tasks are they doing? We don't have any news to report of Russian offensives in the east or the south, and that lets us know that this whole entire thing is a propaganda thing of the Russians saying, hey, y'all aren't going to be getting any news from the Lysychansk area because those forces are almost on the brink of collapse. But we're going to pretend like the Russian army is doing something else around the rest of the country, and so they're going to continue on their non-existent offensive in the east, and also the non-existent offensives in the south as well. Golly, you can't make this stuff up, and that's why we know that the Russians are flat out lying about the condition of those soldiers. That isn't a congratulatory rest. That is a rest because those units are collapsing right now, and they hardly have the ability to carry on. With that, of course, nothing else to report from the Zaporizhzhia front line, and I just wanted to point that out from a speech earlier. And with that, we're now going to be moving on to the Kherson area, starting off with the Kherson finger. And we can see a Ukrainian soldier talking about why a car is useful. Now, I can't give you a direct translation of what he's saying, but based off of what they're carrying, I can give you a really good idea of what he's saying. He is saying, a car would be nice, this thing is heavy, and we're having to carry it around by foot.
Здорово! Вот для этой хуйни нужна машина, потому что мы охуеваем ее носить. И пацаны охуевают ее носить. А еще, блядь, сколько она важит? А еще будет стрелять. Да важит она 70 килограмм. Пошло она нахуй, она важит. Так что, блядь, если нема по пару рублей, сделайте хоть репост. Пиздец, как нужна машина, блядь.
That's the end of the video, but this thing is not light at all. This thing weighs 70 kilograms with the tripod attached. And just to give you all an idea, my American viewers, how much 70 kilograms weighs, if we put that into pounds, that SPG-9, I believe it's called, or SPG-9, it weighs 154 pounds. And so it's rather heavy. We can see that they have divided the weight amongst 3 men. But still, that is no laughing matter to have to lug around everywhere. It's practically a heavy infantry mortar that's 120 millimeters in size, and even at that, those don't get up to that weight often. So I do hope that they can get a car, and hopefully that will alleviate some of their issues, because one cannot overstate how much a mechanical assistant, whether it be a car or a horse, even with a wagon, can help out with moving stuff around the front lines. It removes a lot of weight from the common soldier and helps them to further carry out their tasks more efficiently. So hopefully the Ukrainians can get these guys a car, because they've been lugging this thing around for a long time. With that, we're now going to be moving down to the Kherson area, where we have seen today that the Ukrainians have destroyed a massive amount of Russian vehicles on the outskirts of the city just today. You see some Russian vehicles moving in the tree lines outside of the city of Kherson, and the Ukrainians, of course, are scouting out their targets. Just look at the convoy there. The artillery is now raining down all over, and especially right there. And it appears the Russians are not having a fun time as usual. I don't ever think the Russians really ever do have a fun time, even when they're not in a war. But they're certainly not having a fun time here. Now we can see a decent-sized convoy of vehicles, one burning at the front, and the rest of the convoy has come to a halt. A great danger that these Russian vehicles have put themselves in, as a stationary target is much easier to hit than a moving target. Burned out Russian truck, burned out Russian tanks, BTR sitting around waiting for their turn. More burning Russian tanks all over the small village. Also, nice church right there. That's really pretty. To getting sidetracked from the destruction and everything, the church is really nice. And just the continuing of smoldering of Russian vehicles. That's the end of the video, but a great one to see, and I'm very happy that the Ukrainians are still destroying Russian equipment near the Kherson area. Not only are they destroying Russian equipment, they're destroying Kherson airport supply routes as well. And we can see that on a time-lapse of camera footage taken of the airport here in this video. It's a 7-second long video, not long by any means, but you can see the fields burning around Kherson airport here, just to show us that the Russians weren't having a fun time there. So that's the end of the video, but it's great to see that the Ukrainians are still inflicting damage on the Kherson area, and hopefully soon we'll be able to recapture it, considering that the Russians have now even exhausted their final offensive in the north near Lysychansk. With that, we're now going to be moving to our brawl. This isn't a brawl in between the Russians and the Ukrainians. This is a brawl in between Ukrainians and Ukrainians. It's something that we've seen well, actually, we've never seen this before. This is the first time. But it seems like a city official in Odessa, along with a military official, got into a fist fight today. And I don't really know why. No one really knows why, but apparently stress was running high in the city of Odessa, where nothing's been going on for months. And they got in a fist fight. So I'm just going to let y'all see it. It's a lot like like an MMA fight, but it was broken up pretty quickly. Anyways, here's the video. Now see him getting up, and punches are thrown. You now see them pulling him apart.
Пидорас, понял, блядь? Вы не можете, дядик ёбаный, блядь. Наркоман, блядь. Охуел, извращенец конченый. Вы не можете, я извращенец, блядь. Фотографии показать твою, ты пидор, блядь. Покажи, блядь. Да есть у меня, блядь. Покажи, козлина. Да покажи, у меня нет, блядь.
That's how some of my viewers act when I say Don for the third time in the stream. Anyways, moving on from the fight. This fight we're not really sure why it was caused. I did hear that apparently some Russian mother lover kind of wordage was thrown around, and so apparently that's what caused the fight. We don't know what it led up to it, of course, but it was a fight. One thing that's interesting, though, is that it seemed really emotionally charged. And of course, fights are always emotionally charged. But one thing I'm trying to still understand is why. What were they saying before this video began that led to the fight? We'll be trying to look into it. Most likely, someone was sitting around the table and said, "We should attack the Russians now, Don." And this guy just went off. Or this guy went ballistic. But with that, that's the end of the video. And we'll try and follow up on some news with that and see why that happened. It was a city council meeting with the military and some city officials. And apparently the military and the city officials there are having a little bit of a rough spot. Hopefully they can manage to sort it all out. But still an interesting video that we've never seen the likes of which before. Moving on out of Ukraine and into the European Union's headquarters in Brussels. We did see today that the Ukrainians have now been allowed to use their licenses to drive cars in the European Union. The European Union is going to recognize Ukrainian driver licenses for a short while during the state of emergency, so that way Ukrainian refugees can better get on with their daily lives, and some of their lives may revolve around using a car. So we're of course going to wish them the best of luck. Hopefully they can get some nice cars to drive around, and maybe get a job or get themselves some food or whatever they may need to do to keep themselves alive and going for now. But it's great to see that the European Union is making an exception at this moment and making sure that the Ukrainians that they have so graciously let in will be able to use some cars to help themselves out. With that, we're now going to be moving to Ireland, where we have seen that the Irish support for Ukraine has never died, and we can see banners put out on government buildings still showing support for Ukraine. Sadly, we will not be seeing that picture tonight, but I can tell you that it was a pretty nice one. Now, moving on to the big news that we've been holding out on for the whole night. Belarus has decided to grow some balls, and balls in not really the good way. Belarus has decided to threaten Poland with invasion because they think that the West might invade Belarus. That's kind of the backwards way of going about things. If you thought that the West was going to invade you, usually you would sit there and say, hey, don't invade us. That wouldn't be a great idea. Please don't do that. Instead, Belarus is saying that they're going to invade Poland just because something could happen. So it's pretty much an insurance policy, which I'm never really a big fan of. Of course, the news article here just backs that up. It was a political statement, so it was one of the few times I allowed a news article to be used. But it is an interesting little statement by Belarus, considering that their military hardly even exists. So, of course, like we said with Alaska, kind of challenged them to do that because I don't think that would end well for them. And I don't really know if the Russians would back them up in a war like that or not. And so with that, we have now reached the end of tonight's news. Of course, we have one last big bit of news to cover, which is the speech from President Zelenskyy. But by and large, the news has been covered for the day. And so now we're going to return to Kyiv, and we're going to listen to the speech from the man, the myth, the legend, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Here's his speech for day 134, the very beginning of week 19.
Здоров'я, шановні українці. Сьогодні головною темою в нашій країні стала британська тема. Рішення Бориса Джонсона залишити посаду голови партії і прем'єр-міністра. Вдень я говорив з ним, подякував за підтримку, яку ми отримали від першого дня російського терору. Передусім це зброя, комплекси протиповітряної оборони, стінгери, круті протитанкові системи НЛАВ, а ще артилерія, боєприпаси, броньовані машини і багато всього іншого. Вагома політична підтримка, сильні санкції проти Росії, фінансова допомога нашій державі. Лише на потреби безпеки і оборони виділено більше 2 мільярдів фунтів від 24 лютого. Роль Британії дійсно глобальна у захисті свободи. І хоча це відображення позиції британського суспільства, все ж таки лідерство і харизма очільника держави завжди мають особливе значення. І тим більше у такий час повномасштабної антиєвропейської війни Росії, яка розпочала наступ на Європу саме з нашої держави. Тож не дивно, що українці відчувають особисту вдячність Борису. Але все ж не забуваємо, що відносини між нами будуємо між державами. Підтримка Великої Британії і України не має змінитись, щоб не відбувалось у лондонських владних колах. І Борис, і всі наші друзі в Сполученому Королівстві запевнили мене в цьому. Зустрівся сьогодні в Києві з представниками Конгресу США, сенаторами Лінсі Гремом і Річардом Блюменталем. Вони представляють обидві партії, республіканську і демократичну. І обидва дуже принципово підтримують Україну. Саме вони стали авторами резолюції, яка закликає Державний департамент визнати Росію державою-спонсором тероризму. Подякував їм за цю активність і сподіваюся, що вона буде доведена до результату. Поінформував сенаторів про ситуацію на передовій, про те, до чого готуються окупанти. Зокрема, йшлося про Донбас, про південь нашої країни, про Харківську область. Сьогодні російська армія знову вдарила по Краматорську. І знову ракетами били окупанти і по Харкову, по містам Донбасу. По кожному з напрямків наші партнери мають точну інформацію щодо наших оборонних потреб. Це стосується протиповітряної оборони, сучасної реактивної артилерії. Чим більшою буде оборонна допомога Україні зараз, тим швидше війна закінчиться нашою перемогою. І тим меншими будуть збитки усіх країн світу, збитки Сполучених Штатів від російського тиску на демократичні суспільства. Завтра продовжу серію звернень до європейських парламентів. На черзі Словенія. Завтра ж буде багато внутрішньоукраїнських новин. Попереду дуже змістовний день. По завершенню конференції в Лугано, яка була присвячена відбудові України, урядовці вже мають домовленості на невідкладну допомогу нашій державі обсягом більше $2 мільярдів. Ці кошти будуть спрямовані на посилення бюджету, підготовку до зими. До речі, вагомою підтримкою і зараз, і протягом опалювального сезону є експорт української електрики в країни Євросоюзу, який вже розпочався. Ціна на електрику на європейському ринку вища, ніж в Україні. І це дозволить енергокомпаніям використовувати зароблені кошти для забезпечення українських споживачів, причому при незмінних тарифах. Також урядовці активно працюють над логістикою аграрного експорту, заслухав сьогодні з цього приводу міністра інфраструктури і міністра аграрної політики. Зробимо все, щоб зберегти доступ до світового ринку попри російську блокаду наших портів. І, звичайно, хочу сьогодні подякувати за завершальний етап боротьби за Зміїни. Там встановлений наш національний прапор. 2 місяці тривала ця операція. Розвідка, сили спеціальних операцій, альфівці, СБУ, прикордонники, артилеристи, військово-морські сили, повітряні сили. І хай тепер кожен російський капітан, чи то корабля, чи то літака, бачить український прапор на Зміїному і знає, що нашу державу не зламати. Дякую всім, хто захищає Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the news here on day 134, and that is the end of the speech from President Zelenskyy. If you are here for the news tonight, I ask that you hang on with me for a second, as we do have major international news ongoing outside of Ukraine that has occurred in the middle of our stream. Shinzo Abe, the former Prime Minister of Japan, has been shot in the back by apparently a former police officer, a current police officer aged 46 years old, and we're going to see if he is still alive at the moment. Apparently, 12 minutes ago, we still have news that he collapsed during his speech. It appears that he's not dead yet, as per the news headlines here, and we will check back.
Enforcer, he is actually still alive, and at the moment he's being transferred to Nara Medical University Hospital by medevac. So people say that he's in cardiopulmonary arrest, but he is not dead as of yet. And many people were saying that he was shot from behind with a shotgun. So as you know, that's really horrendous to be shot with a shotgun. So hopefully he's okay, but that's not looking good.
No, it's not at all. And it's honestly shocking to hear that's happened to Shinzo Abe, who may have been, honestly, one of the most neutral leaders of any country in the world I've ever heard of. Of course, not really heavily entrenched in Japanese politics, but as far as I knew, he's not really a divisive figure as they come. So I wonder why he was shot. hopefully there will be an explanation given soon as to why this person trying to kill Shinzo. And we'll, of course, be trying to keep up on that news as the stream goes on tonight. Of course, I know this is a Ukraine war stream, but this is an international event of major notoriety, especially considering that's a former Japanese prime minister, Japan being the third largest economy in the world behind China and the United States. And so we will be looking into this news heavily as the night goes on. So with that, we have now reached the end of the news segment for the night. If you would like to stay around and get regular updates on Shinzo, we will be doing that during the question segment. But of course, the Ukraine war news has ended for tonight. Thank you all once again for watching. And if you would like to subscribe, please make sure to do so. And if you want to, please make sure to hang around in the question segment, because if you send in a live chat question, you may be one of the lucky people who get that question answered. And also, if you send in a super chat, we will make sure to answer everyone's questions. And so with that, on to the question segment.
All right, and moving into our final question segment of the night, we have a $20 super chat from Scrog GCW, who says, "Thank you for the effort and great reporting."
And I thank you so much for the support, and we do try our best. And I thank you so much for enjoying it, because it's always great to know that people are very appreciative of what we do out there. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment, and we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from LG, who says, "Enforcers, try some espresso. It will change your lives. Hashtag another new fund."
Well, I thank you very much for the espresso fund, but I am dead set now on Busy, which is the coffee that we drink. Hopefully we can get a sponsorship from them or something, but Busy Cold Brew is some of the best cold brew I've had. It tastes like dirt, but it does get the job done, and I'm always ready to go after having a nice good sip of Busy. And so get yourself busy with a drink of Nitro Cold Brew. And so thank you very much for the support. We will look into the espressos, though, and of course, always a huge shout out to Busy, which has been keeping me going and keeping me alive for about the past month. And so with that, we are on to the next question, but thank you once again for the support, and thank you for the Busy Fund.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from MJ, who says, "If Putin offers to end the war in exchange for the Donbass, will Ukraine take it, and should they?"
I don't know. I mean, like, right now, Zelenskyy did have an interview on CNN today that I did watch. He said that he's not going to really allow any Ukrainian lands to remain in Russian hands. He did admit that some of it may stay in Russian hands, but he's going to try and get back all of it as much as possible. So I don't know if that would be something that the Ukrainians would go for. Maybe so, considering that the Donetsk and Luhansk republics have pretty much been non-Ukrainian for around 8 years. And so I think that he may let those go. But once again, that's just an assumption on my end, and I have no better access to the internal thoughts of President Zelenskyy or the government officials of Ukraine and Russia than you do. And so that, please make sure to keep that in mind. But I hope that does answer the question, and thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next question.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from WF2U, who says, "Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, I noticed in the music section that the Ukrainians are playing a lot of Finnish songs from the Winter Continuation War in Ukrainian. I love the originals and these also."
And I thank you so much for the support, and I do have to agree, I love the originals as well. I love the one that is called Kremlin Uni. If you ever heard that one's a great one. From I believe the original Finnish Winter War, not the Continuation War. But I do love the Finnish songs that came out during that time. And also, one funny thing that y'all may not know, a little interesting fact, is that the Finns during the Winter War actually jammed the Russian radio frequencies by playing Sekijärven polka on all of them, which is a famous Finnish folk song. Y'all may actually know it. If you don't, pull it up. It's actually a pretty fun little song. But they played that over and over and over, day after day, 24 hours a day, and jammed Russian radio frequencies with it. So I think the Russians hate them still for that, but I do love the songs. And it's good to see that the Ukrainians have been picking up a lot of interesting songs from all over and adapting them to the current war. And so with that, I hope that does address the question, and I thank you once again for the kind support, and it does help us out a lot. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $10 super chat from Greg Carman, who says, "Thanks for keeping this going."
And I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that everyone does appreciate that we do keep this going. Once again, we can't keep this going without everyone's support, and everyone's been helping to support this channel, and we're always very appreciative of it because it helps us to keep on doing this as our sole focus. Of course, we're going to be trying to move out and uncover more stuff here in the future, which I'm planning on trying to do pretty soon. But of course, I'm trying to find a way to do that time-wise, because, you know, I'm fairly busy. But with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy that we're still here and still covering the news 134 days in. So with that, thank you once again for the support, and I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a $10 super chat from BL Parak, who says Putin is definitely on prednisone. And I'm not sure what prednisone is, but the enforcer will probably have to pull that up.
Yes, we will. Prednisone. 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 It's a steroid. What is prednisone used for? It is a corticosteroid. It's commonly used to treat inflammation of the skin, joints, lungs, and other organs. Common conditions treated include asthma, allergies, and arthritis. Of course, is arthritis. It is also used for other conditions, such as blood disorders and diseases of the adrenal glands. So it appears that it's a cure-all, fix-all for really anything that has to do with arthritis or asthma. So
it sounds like he's trying to say Putin's on some roid rage.
Yeah, it appears that he's on some roid rage, and I would have to agree. Putin is definitely on the roids, and he is certainly raging. Not really sure which direction he's raging in, but it's most likely leaning in the direction of raging about how many losses the Russians have taken. And yet he had the audacity today, according to an article, to say that Russia has not even begun to fight yet, with 36,000, 37,000 Russian soldiers killed, and almost no ground actually taken. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment. And I would have to agree, he's probably using that considering the underlying conditions we already know of, such as that terminal cancer. And so, with that, we're going to move on to the next question. But I thank you once again for the support and for weighing that in, because that may actually be one of the medications he's using. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
All right. And let me recognize a few donations left without comments. We have a $10 super chat from Duke Savage. We also have a $3 super chat from RakeHell8, a $1 super chat from Zach Jeffers, and a $1 super chat from Bill G. So, thank you very much to all of you for your support of the channel. We appreciate it, and as the Enforcer always says, it helps to keep us running. So, moving on to the next super chat, we have a $10 donation from Ashley, who says, shout out to Biker Dad for his translation. And Ashley, I agree with you 100%. Biker Dad is absolutely killing it with the translations in the live chat, and it's very helpful to everybody. So thank you very much, Ashley, for the support, and Biker Dad for the translations.
And I do agree as well, because I have seen Biker Dad in there, and he is pulling through with the translations. And of course, I have to give credit to Biker Dad for doing that. It's a huge help to our entire Lysychansk army in understanding what some Ukrainians are saying when there's no kind of translation available, and it's a huge help to me, and it's a huge help to everyone watching. And so thank you, Ashley, for bringing up Biker Dad, because I would love for everyone to give him a huge thanks for the translating he's doing in the comments section. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And once again, thank you, Biker Dad, for doing that translating, and thank you so much, Ashley, for the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And thank you once again, Ashley.
All right, and up next we have a $7 super chat from Olivia McCarthy, who says, what is your take over Putin's latest ramblings saying that the West should beat Russia on the battlefield instead of supporting Ukraine?
Wait a minute, can you say that again?
They said, what is your take over Putin's latest ramblings saying that the West should beat Russia on the battlefield instead of supporting Ukraine?
I have not heard of those ramblings, but if they did exist, and that's what he said, I mean, like, if he's challenging us to open warfare, hey, that's about as good as it can get, yeah. I mean, like, if he wanted us to go to war, I don't really think it'd be a fair fight, and that would kind of fix the whole Ukraine issue, because Russia, you know, of course, would be defeated pretty quickly. So yeah, I mean, like, you know, if he wants to go down that route, as long as nukes aren't used, I would be for it. I would do my part to try and help out in the war effort, and so. Yeah, you know, I think that's insane, really. And it's also asinine. It's suicidal because the Russians wouldn't be able to stand up against the combined armies of Europe and the United States. But, you know, the guy's an idiot, doesn't really have a lot of intelligence in his head. And, you know, what's funny is that everyone imagined Putin for decades as this cold, calculating, intelligent and cunning ex-KGB agent. And now during this war, based off of the strategies that the Russians are using, along with how he's acted, he's made himself look like a raving idiot. A lot like Hitler, really. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support. I hope that does address the question. I do think he's insane, and those kinds of ramblings are just someone trying to threaten the world. And once again, that draws it back into the actual picture that the Russians are not America's friends. And some people think that they are, but they're not, and they never will be. And so I would wish and I would hope that people who think that Russia is our friends will actually think of these kinds of statements from the Russians and second guess their positions, because the Russians do not have our best interests in mind. And also, I kind of find it to be a bit of a sellout if you're an American and you would support the Russians and throw the United States under the bus for a country that cares very little about their citizens, much less an American citizen. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I hope that does address it. And thank you once again for the support.
And up next, we have another $10 super chat from Ashley, who says, "Salutations to the marvelous Enforcer team. We appreciate your alacrity and humor."
And I thank you so much for the support, Ashley. And it does help us out a massive deal with the support. And it helps us to be alacritic, if that's the correct, like a suffix to the word, and also humorous as well, because it helps us to continue to keep on trying to make sure that these streams keep running. And so thank you so much for the salutations and also the support, as it does help us to keep running. And so thank you once again, Ashley. I think that's actually your second time supporting us tonight, isn't it, Matthew?
Yes, it is.
And so with that, thank you once again, and it helps us out a great deal. And we're appreciative to everyone that helps us to keep running and helps the Lee Spring Army to keep running as well. And so with that, we are on to the next question, and thank you for about the third time I've said for the support. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a $20 super chat from Santiago Flores, who says, "What is your take about Slovak MiG-29 to Ukraine since we have crossed almost all the red lines? What is Putin going to do? And good work, guys. Keep it up."
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And I wanted to see here, could finally facilitate a transfer of MiG-29s to Ukraine. So it does look like Slovakia will be transferring them according to these news articles. I don't want to talk about, because it's not... So, one second, I want to read this real quick to make sure I can answer that question, Santiago. So it appears that it's something that's happening in the background, but we don't know a lot about yet. And of course, I always wait for video evidence to confirm that something is happening. Like with support, I always wait for a video of a train pulling it across the border or it finally being there. And so I don't know if they're there yet. As of 4 days ago, it seemed like that was definitely on the table and something that was in the talks behind the scenes. And if that is happening or it's going to happen, and Ukraine is able to get access to MiG-29s, and somehow the Russians don't go batty about it, I do think that may open the gateway for the United States to just send over really any aircraft they would want to send over as well. And considering that some Ukrainian pilots seem to have some kind of cross-training on Western aircraft like the F-15 or the F-16, this may be the perfect moment to step in and give the Ukrainians some very modern, up-to-date aircraft like the F-15. And I know that a lot of people want the AC-130 to go over, or the A-10, but I'm going to tell you all that while they're cool, and they're great ground support aircraft, they don't really hold up to what the modern war and modern war has... the modern world and modern war has turned into. And so I would say that the F-15 would most likely be the best aircraft to send over, because it is, of course, a incredible missile slinger. It can shoot down aircraft over the horizon almost 150 miles away, and on top of that, it can also carry a pretty decent ground attack ordnance. It's a multi-role aircraft. It can do everything. And so if the MiG-29s do make it over and nothing happens internationally as a result, I think that's going to open up the gateway for everyone else to be able to send in the aircraft that they've been trying to send in since the start. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, Santiago, and thank you so much for encouraging us to keep it up, and we will make sure to do so. And so thank you once again for the support, Santiago. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a super chat from Sweaty Chungus, who puts in a $10 donation and says, Lysychansk was deeply offended by the Russian rabbit CGI. Being that it is still mating season, I am deeply troubled and confused.
Well, and thank you for the support, Sweaty Chungus. And I mean, like, honestly, you don't have to worry about it, though, because those rabbits were going, and they were gone. Hopefully you could hear that, Matthew. Did you?
Yes, I
Okay,
could.
okay, good. I was just wanting to make sure the sound effects came through. But I wouldn't worry about it too much, Sweaty Chungus, because those rabbits are probably long gone at this point. But still, the rabbit CGI was a little bit weak. Just to remind everyone the rabbit CGI we are talking about. Let me go back to that little video real quick of the phone call. And we're going to go straight to the part where he goes, and the rabbits go flying across the screen. So let me find that real quick. Here we go.
Теперь как зайцы по норам, понял? Вот только где-то что засвистело, все, и фук, ебать, они уже...
They're literally just a stock image of a rabbit, and they just slide it across the screen. But yeah, I mean, like, I could consider that deeply offensive to the rabbit community. And of course, we hate for that, honestly. But still, the Russians are running around like some rabbits. But thank you once again for the joke, Sweaty Chungus. You've been around for a pretty good while, and of course, we thank you so much for the support and helping us to continue on this channel. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment, and thank you once again. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And next up, let me give a shout out to David Hollinghurst for putting in a $50 donation. He does not leave a comment, but David, thank you so much for your support, and I'm going to let the enforcer add his 2 bits into that as well.
And also, thank you so much for the support, David. It does help us out a lot and helps us to keep the lights on here at home and help keep running these streams. Of course, I would like to make it clear, I haven't done this in a while, but the Super Chats do support me and Matthew and help us to keep on doing this as our full-time jobs. And that is something that we're incredibly appreciative of because, of course, it helps us to keep on doing this. And that in its own right is just enough explanation for us to be incredibly grateful. And so I thank you once again, David Hollinghurst, for your support. It helps us out a great deal, and we're just very appreciative of it. And so thank you once again. It does mean a lot to us. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And I hate that you didn't leave a comment because we would have answered it. But of course, I guess you find the stream itself to be good enough. And for that, we're highly honored. And I thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right. And before I move on to the next question, just to let everybody know, I am searching for a video of that attack in Japan. And if I can find it, it's pretty scarce at the moment. But if I can find it, I will send it over to the enforcer. And maybe we can show that live on stream. I'm also still looking for updates on that situation. So please stand by and I will give you the information as soon as I find it. But up next on the Super Chats, we have a $7 donation from the Vladinator, who says, thanks for the laughs with the jokes and the grits and Nutella joke. My question is, if the missiles don't have enough chips, etc. for maintenance, how competent do you think their nuclear forces would be?
Ooh, that's a really good question, because you see that the Iskander cruise missiles are even starting to fail at a very high rate. They're not even leaving their launch site, pretty much. So, putting that into the perspective with the nuclear arsenal, which has probably not been kept up at all over the past 30 years, and they've just been sitting inside of their silos, slowly dry rotting, I would imagine that they're probably in very bad condition, and most of them probably aren't even operational. And that goes for the same with the United States, which has a $700 billion military budget, and most of our nukes, as far as we know, aren't even kept up to a very good standard in a launchable condition. So in that instance, I would say that the ability for the Russians to actually use the nukes might be small, but then again, that's just a guess, and all of those nuclear weapons could have been kept up to a prime degree, considering that that's what the Russians know they count on for their defense, pretty much, or they could have been so derelict that a lot of them have been deactivated and we don't even know about it, but we would. But with that, I hope that kind of does answer the question, at least in a way, because it's really hard to assess how the nuclear arsenal is going. And of course, it's going to be impossible to maintain them because a lot of the equipment and technology that they would need to replace on some of these missiles to make sure that they're still functional, like computer chip systems and such things like that, are of course no longer accessible to the Russians because the major economies that produce those kinds of computer chips, the Taiwanese, the South Koreans, the Japanese, and so on, have completely blocked them off from trade. And so in that aspect, they wouldn't be able to upkeep them. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Ukraine F. Putin, who says Putin said that Russia has not yet started anything serious in Ukraine. Besides nukes, what does he have left to throw on the table?
Can you reread that one again? Because I saw someone talking about Abe and that distracted me for a second.
He said, Putin said that Russia has not yet started anything serious in Ukraine. And the question is, besides nukes, what does he have left to throw on the table?
Was the first bit a statement?
Yes.
I do think the Russians have begun to fight in Ukraine, and that's what they've been doing the whole time. Because that would be really sad to think that their strategists enter a war without the intent to win it from the very start. So in that regard, I would have to disagree. The Russians certainly have begun to fight, and hopefully I heard that correctly. But they certainly have begun to fight, and now they're starting to not really fight. They've already put their maximum effort into it, and have really gotten nowhere. But to answer the other part of that question, can you reread that last part about the nukes?
Yes. Let's see here. He said, besides nukes, what does he have left to throw on the table in reference to Putin?
Besides nukes, he doesn't really have a lot to throw on the table. They were already using their cruise and ballistic missile ordinances as much as possible, which is about as close as you can get to using nuclear weapons without getting there. Of course, not in yield. And explosive yield's a different story, but in terms of the technology and the abilities, that's about as far as you can go. They've already used the combined arms of their entire military, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army, and they haven't really gotten anywhere. They've really exhausted all of their options except for nukes in terms of their conventional abilities, and it hasn't even gotten them that far. And one thing that I have heard someone say, I'm not going to say who, but someone did say, well, I mean, like, the Russians control 20% of the country, and I don't consider that winning. I would consider it winning, considering that the Russians were supposed to be. Of course, they're not, but starting off with what everyone thought at the opening of this war, they're supposed to be a superpower, and somehow over 4.5 months, they only control 20% of Ukraine's country. So, in that regard, I would say that they've exhausted everything, and they haven't really gotten much in return. And so beyond nukes, they've pretty much exhausted all of their options in terms of their conventional weapons. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Tony K, who says, for the pizza fund.
And thank you so much, Tony, for the support. We really do need a pizza right about now. Actually, I'm pretty hungry. I tried to eat supper. Oh yeah, we did have supper tonight. It was a pot roast, delicious pot roast. My mom does cook suppers around here, and they're incredibly good. She also cooked up some homemade biscuits, and the pot roast, of course, was in gravy, and so you got the gravy from the pot roast and put it on the biscuits, and it was killer. My mom makes a great biscuit, I'll tell you that. And then also, what was the other thing that we had tonight, Matt? We had the pot roast, the biscuits, and what was the third thing? Baked potato.
Potato.
Yeah, baked potato. You know, just slather some sour cream in there with a little bit of butter. Solid. It was delicious. It was a great supper tonight. But of course, I'm hankering for a pizza right now. I could go for a pepperoni pizza, a supreme, Mediterranean. Man, like right now, just saying that, I can taste the pepperonis. But with that, I thank you so much for supporting the Pizza Fund, and we're going to make sure to get one pretty soon. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support and supporting our little Pizza Fund. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, I want to give a shout out to Anthony, who puts in a $10 super chat and does not leave a comment. But Anthony, thank you very much for the support, and thank you for watching. And up next, we have hold on just a moment, a $5 super chat from Heather Fitzgibbon, who says, thank you for repeatedly saying that Russia is not a friend of the U.S., nor have they ever been. Slava Ukraine.
And I thank you so much for the support, and also thanking me for saying that, because it's got to be clear to people. I don't know why people live in a fantasy land, but the United States does have national rivals. And right now, those national rivals, if we're just to name them off, are North Korea. You know, I'm not saying that they're actual sizable, powerful national rivals. I'm just saying they are our rivals. The Koreans, the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians. There are, of course, a couple of others, but I don't really know what their stance is at this point anymore. It's very confusing, like Cuba. Like, what are they? Are they with us or against us? You know, like, they're against us policy-wise, but trade-wise, they're not. And, you know, I'm like, that one, I don't know if they're a rival still anymore or not. I'll try and look into that and find out. But we do have a decent amount of rivals. And when you're talking about a stance governmentally with these countries, you always have to assume they have the worst interests in mind for the United States in the long term. And so you have to view them as rivals, and you have to make sure to be very careful when considering anything with them. And especially when you're about to throw the entirety of the United States under the bus for them. You're pretty much playing right into what they would like. And you know, I don't know why people don't ever think that it's literally the game anymore. You know, the strategic worldwide game that everyone used to play and everyone used to think about. Because the United States, and regardless of who you are, if you were born in the United States, the entire nation, and this goes for anyone born around the world, this goes for Polish people, British people, Germans, Japanese, Chinese, Russians, Kazakhs, Iranians, and so on. If you're born in a country, that entire country has put, for nearly 18 years of your life, their maximum effort, the best they have, into trying to raise you and take care of you. And to sit there, and after the whole entire nation has put their heart and soul and all the love that they can into trying to make sure that you end up as best as you can, to sit there and turn against them and sell them out to a country that pretty much wants you dead, or doesn't really care about you, seems very sad. And that's one thing I want to make clear, is that these people in Russia are certainly not anyone's friends in the United States. And if you think that, they're messing with you, because they don't care for anyone in the United States, and that's pretty much the truth. Now, you can be friends with Russian people. There's nice Russian people out there. Of course, everyone in the world is always nice when you talk to them. Whenever you go to North Korea, the people you run into are fairly nice. But at the end of the day, there are national rivals, and so you have to view them in that light, and so they're not our friends. And so I thank you once again for the support and appreciating that I say that, and I think that's an important point to talk about when people speak of the Russians. They're not our friends. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, but I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, Enforcer. And in the meantime, I have compiled what I have found on Shinzo Abe in Japan. At the moment, he is still in the hospital. He has not been pronounced dead, but we do have the video, and Enforcer, it is in your Discord inbox, of the moment he was shot, and it is quite horrific. I'm not sure if the Enforcer wants to show it at the moment, but it is there if you want to see it. We also have a photo of the attacker and a photo of the aftermath. So, Enforcer, I'm going to leave that up to you.
Is it incredibly graphic? Would it possibly break YouTube guidelines where this becomes an 18 and up video?
I would probably say not.
All right, so with that in mind, under the advisement that it's not an age-restricted kind of content, we are going to show the videos and pictures that Matthew has compiled. And thank you once again, Matthew, for doing that behind the scenes.
And on the second image, I would say probably so. The third image is probably okay.
All right, so we're going to click on the Discord. All right, so we see that one. We're going to go to the speech. We're going to watch this video first. Are the first two videos pretty much the same, or no?
So the ones you're going to want to click on is not the first one, and it's going to actually be the second one for the video, and then you'll see the two pictures below it.
Got you. So we already passed over the two pictures. Here's the video of the speech, which we'll show real quick. There's Shinzo. The video is buffering. Sorry about that, everyone. Hopefully it'll work. Oh man, let me see if I can skip forward. Matthew, can you still hear me? Just checking our connection's good?
Yes.
Okay, I think this video is not going to load, so I'm going to go throw it up on Twitter real quick and see if it'll load over here. Once again, what you may see may be graphic in what it's depicting, but as far as we know, the video is not too graphic. Oh God. What type of gun? Oh, good Lord. I mean, you've seen...
It appears to be some sort of modified shotgun of some sort.
The powder that it flung out of the barrel was massive. Is that... What if that's a black powder shotgun?
But some people say it's a DIY shotgun, so it may be.
But what we get... But, you know, just to explain what we saw in the video, the man fired what sounded like 2 shots from the shotgun into the back of Shinzo Abe, and he was a cop. So we just saw that video there. We're, of course, going to pass over the second picture because we did see it at a glance. We're going to pass over that. And we can apparently see the attacker here. This is the man. So we're going to go to Twitter and take a look at that real quick. And thank you once again, Matthew, for finding all of this. And it is a custom-made sawed-off shotgun. It appears that it's been broken open here. You can see the casings of the what appears to be 12-gauge shells, sticking out of the back of the two barrels, and it has a very improvised-looking pistol grip that looks like it came from a normal service pistol in a way. This is bizarre. You see, because Japan actually has incredibly strict gun laws, and so creating anything that'll be able to sustain the pressure of these shells actually firing is next to impossible. That kind of material is heavily regulated in Japan. Yet this man has somehow managed to make an improvised shotgun that not only was usable, but actually has caused grave harm to Shinzo. So, interesting bit of news here. Thank you once again for compiling this, Matthew. And shocking, to say the least, that somehow this improvised shotgun, I believed it was actually one that was apparently used by the police, but that appears not to be so. He's shot the former prime minister, so we'll of course be keeping up to date on that. And thank you once again, Matthew, for finding all of those videos and pictures, so that way we could see what actually has happened as far as we can see on Twitter. So with that, we're going to move on to the next one, and thank you once again, Matthew, for sharing that with us, and hopefully we can get an update saying that Shinzo will hopefully survive, but as far as we know, he is in cardiac arrest, and cardiac arrest, for as long as we've heard he's been in it, is certainly not a good sign. But with that, we're now moving on to the next question.
Yes, and you are very welcome, Enforcer, and I will add this before we move on to our next one. Sadly, it appears from one of the headlines I just saw that we are simply waiting on a official pronunciation on the death of Shinzo Abe. It appears he is not living any longer, so we'll have to see here momentarily. That's not totally confirmed, but that is the rumor at the moment. So moving on, we have a $25 super chat from Yoli H, who says, "Why is Snake Island called Snake Island?"
Snake Island is called Snake Island for... Oh, I forgot the symbolic... I forgot to do this when I covered the news earlier. So excited to cover it. I forgot. This red outline actually shows it's a Russian-controlled island, and now we can get rid of that. It's Ukrainian again. But the reason why Snake Island is called Snake Island... Maybe we can find some information on it. So let's go down to the Wikipedia article. Wait, no. Not the Wikipedia article. Island has been known since class... Oh, that's really cool! Oh my... Wow, this is amazing. Okay, let's go to the Wikipedia article. The real name of the island is Zhimny Island. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. But this island has been known since classic antiquity, and during that era, it hosted a Greek temple to Achilles on the island. That is incredibly cool. Also, Odessa has been around since Greek times, just in case y'all didn't know. The island is populated, reported to have under 30 people in 2012. 30 people? Interesting. I'm guessing that they're all just serving on the island to man the lighthouse and also the relays that let ships know that they're getting close to this rocky reef that's most likely surrounding this island. Let's see. This happened border dispute between Romania and Ukraine from 2004 to 2009, during which Romania contested the technical definition of the island and borders around it. The territorial limits of the continental shelf around Snake Island were delineated by the International Court of Justice in 2009, providing Romania with almost 80% of the disputed maritime territory. Of course, we know the story of Snake Island from then, but it doesn't really explain the reason why Snake Island got the name Snake Island. Let's see. Known by the Romans as Alba, which is also the Gaelic name for Scotland, probably because of white marble formations that can be found on the island. It's called Luke because the serpents there were white. According to Arian, it was called Luke due to its color. He and Stephanus of Byzantium mentioned that the island was also referred to as the Island of Achilles and the racecourse of Achilles as well. The island was sacred to the hero Achilles and had a temple of the hero with a statue inside. Solinus wrote that on the island there was a sacred shrine. So pretty much As far as we can tell, the reason why Snake Island is called Snake Island is because supposedly there were serpents, which are snakes, that were around the island that were white. So that's how the island got its name. I actually didn't know that Snake Island had a huge history to it, and it's honestly really cool to know the historical significance behind Snake Island now, considering it actually had a temple to Achilles on it at some time thousands of years ago during the Greek times. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $25 super chat from Uncle Tababite, who says pizza and coffee. Keep it up.
And thank you so much for the support. And we are going to get some pizza and some busy. And we're going to be drinking on that busy. And we're going to be we're going to be eating that busy and drinking that pizza. And so thank you once again for the support. And I thank you so much for supporting our pizza and coffee fund. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. And we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from Ike GPH, who says, old Air Force Colonel here, who enjoys your coverage. How did your midterm and finals go? Have you ever explored teaching at the Air War College at Maxwell AFB?
Well, well, I thank you very much for the support, and it's of course very great to hear that you are a former colonel in the Air Force, and thank you very much for your service. And also, you must have been in for quite some time to become most likely a full-bird colonel, or else you would have been a lieutenant colonel. But still, very interesting to hear. But I'm not sure if they take on civilian instructors at the Air War College in Maxwell. And on top of that, Montgomery has become a very unfavorable place. I actually do still have a friend who works in the Air National Guard in Alabama, and he actually has to work out of, I believe, the Danley Field in Montgomery. And he never says good things about Montgomery, and I, having lived there for 18 years of my life, can tell you that the city is just continuously getting worse and worse. And so it is a cool idea, and the Air War College is a really neat place. But sadly, just due to the place you would have to live in to work at the Air War College, I wouldn't really consider it to be ideal. And honestly, I could see the Air Force, although I don't know if this would be the case, but I could see the Air Force moving Maxwell out of there and maybe to somewhere else, or at least the Air War College, and keeping Maxwell there. But with that, I thank you once again for the support, and I'm so glad that we do have veterans that enjoy our content of all ages and all different kinds of people, and I'm very honored that you do watch these streams and do find us worth supporting so that we can continue on to carry the news. And also, I thank you for the high honor of saying that what I say is reasonable enough and intelligent enough, with also no military experience behind my knowledge, to say that I could possibly become a professor or a teacher at the Air War College. And so with that, thank you once again for the support and the high praise. It's actually quite an honor, especially from a colonel in the Air Force, to get. And so with that, we're on to the next question, and I thank you once again for the support.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from John Boyer, who says, and bravo, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, Slava Ukraine, Slava President Zelenskyy.
And thank you so much for the support, and also Slava Ukraini and Slava President Zelenskyy. I hope that my Slava Ukraini sounds very similar to President Zelensky's, because whenever I do that now, I'm trying to imitate him, because he always does it at the end of every speech. But with that, thank you so much for the support to us and Ukraine, as well as they keep on doing what everyone never thought was possible. And although, and I have to say this, although the Ukrainians did lose Lysychansk, which is a defeat, there's no way around that. There's no beating around the bush. They're still doing the impossible. No one ever thought Ukraine would even survive against the Russians, much less 4.5 months in. And so what we're seeing right now is nothing short of a miracle. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $15 super chat from Zyper Sniper 1, who says, if Russia mobilized everything they got, how will they maintain that if they already lack weapons and power?
If they mobilized everything they had, there's really no way for them to maintain it right now. They don't have the logistical abilities to keep an army, a fully mobilized army, running. They don't have the weapons or the ability to produce more weapons to keep it running. they may not even have the ability anymore to produce ammunition, although I would consider that a very big stretch. Ammunition is usually a very simple thing to produce, you know, when I'm talking about high explosive ammunition, armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot ammunition, so, such things like that, usually very easy to produce. Anyone could make that, but the complex mechanisms like gun stabilizers, targeting computers and things like that, they certainly don't have the ability to produce, and so they just wouldn't really be able to support a fully mobilized army because they just don't have the economic or the industrial ability to have these carry through to be able to make sure that it could survive longer than a month. And so with that, I thank you for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And the answer is that the Russians just wouldn't be able to support a fully mobilized army. So with that, we're going to move on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from JK, who says, I will add another $10 super chat if you do Mike Tyson again.
Well, man, let me tell you something, man. I'm gonna sit here and do Mike Tyson because I'm the best there ever is. My defense is impregnable. My offense is impenetrable. Of course, I love Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is a crazy man, but he also a great fighter. And he's the best in the world. He's the best world champion. But Jack Dempsey is just better. I have to admit that as well as Mike Tyson. He's just over the top. So thank you once again.
Mike, why do you have to talk like that, Mike?
Man, because it's a fight, man. If you don't like it, turn off your station.
Pretty good, of course. I gotta admit, that's pretty solid.
Yeah, and it looks like a lot of people are liking it and saying LMAO, but thank you so much for the support, everyone. Of course, it helps us to keep on running the channel, and if you do appreciate this stuff, always make sure to support Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson loves everyone's support, and it helps us to keep doing this kind of silly stuff every once in a while and talk like Mike Tyson. That's JK. He's sending the next $10 of support, and if you weren't going to send it in, I was going to bust out your kneecaps and take your children and bust out the nuts with a hammer and let you know the pain I feel inside. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. I hope y'all enjoy that. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And also, thank you, JK, for keeping up your word and enjoying that as well, because I always do that just for everyone to have a good bit of fun. And while we do a war stream, it's always important to have a good laugh and, of course, just have a funny moment here and there. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right. And just to recognize that one more time, JK did put in that $10 super chat. So thanks, JK, for staying true to your word. And thank you for the support. And up next here, we have a $5 super chat from Heather Fitzgibbon again, which I've actually already read. So thank you once again to Heather. And also, sorry for repeating the same one over again. And we are moving on to the next one, which is from KPX1138, who puts in a $5 donation and says, I am seriously considering fighting for the Ukrainians against the unwashed orcs as an Alabamian veteran. Roll Tide.
Well, I thank you so much for the support. And of course, I support all of the boys of Alabama. And regardless of how old you ever become in Alabama, you're always called the boys of Alabama. But I highly support the boys of Alabama going over to Ukraine and giving the Russians a piece of what Alabama's about. Of course, I'm incredibly proud of the nation, but I'm also incredibly proud of my state. And as an Alabamian, we have some very strong and rough people who come from Alabama, as well as some of the kindest people I've ever run into. I've traveled this country all the way to Montana and Wyoming, and all the way from Florida to Virginia. And I haven't ever been to New England, and I've never been all the way out west to California, so sadly I don't know about those people. But Alabamians are some of the kindest people I've ever met, and also they can be some of the meanest, strongest, and most fearful people that I've ever seen. And so I highly support, if you were to go over there, making sure to go over there and represent Alabama well and represent our nation proudly. And so thank you once again for the support. And if you actually do go over there, make sure to tell them that Alabama sent you. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. I hope that does address the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from BSG Wolf, who says F-15C is air superiority. F-15E Strike Eagle is ground attack version. F-15E is inferior to F-16XL Super Viper.
That's true. But then again, I think the F-15C, even, although it is an air superiority fighter, can carry some air-to-ground ordnance. I may be wrong with that, though. You know, I'm not an expert on all of the different variants of the F-15, but still, let's try and take a look and see we can go down here and check out the armaments. These are the specifications for the F-15C, as you can see here on Wikipedia. And according to this here, we can see that it has multiple hard points. It has a total of 9, 2 under the wing. Let's see, carry. Actually, it cannot. I'm actually wrong. It's apparently just an air superiority fighter only, and the carrying of air-to-ground munitions seems to be out of this aircraft's reach, sadly. So I do think we would have to be sending over a better version of the F-15, like the F-15E Strike Eagle, to be able to carry out those ground support missions. And so in that regard, that begs the question, what could we send over that would be of good use to the Ukrainians, that wouldn't be incredibly expensive to us or compromising national security? But with that, thank you so much for the support and also for sharing that information with us, because now I know that every F-15 is not a multi-role aircraft. Some of them are truly purpose-made to be air superiority fighters. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment, and I thank you once again for the support and clarifying that for me as well. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I've just seen, Matthew, that some people are talking about Shinzo Abe in the live chat, and so we're going to pull that up real quick, because some people are saying...
Enforcer, I have been checking that as we've been reading off the super chats, and unfortunately, I cannot confirm that. I'm getting my source from NHK World, and it appears he is still in the hospital and has not been pronounced dead.
And we'll be keeping up with that, of course, throughout the course of the night. It's not Ukraine news, but it's incredibly important. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question. Also, thank you for clarifying that with me, Matthew, as I see a lot of people saying that Shinzo has officially died. And I'm wondering, I'm always like, is that really true or not yet? Because I want to make sure we, of course, address that if it does happen.
Yes, and it looks like a few news sources might have jumped the gun a little bit. But officially, there has been no word on whether or not he's actually dead or not. So, up next, we have a $5 super chat from Jungle Jim AB9AB, who says, your authoritative and timely commentary is greatly appreciated. Please continue to keep your standards high.
And I thank you so much for the support and also the kind words as well. I always try and make sure that the comments are well placed, and sometimes I feel like they missed the mark. I may be an exacting kind of control freak in that regard, but I always try and make sure that the commentary is good, and I'm glad that you do enjoy it. It's a great thing to my ears to hear that people do like it. And also, I thank you so much for encouraging us to keep the standards high, as we're going to try and keep on carrying on these streams in the exact way they've run since the start. And so thank you once again for the support, and also I just thank you so much for encouraging us to keep going. And also another thing, kind of a cool, funny thing, is that if y'all have ever watched the Trooping of the Color in Britain, they've done the Trooping of the Color the exact same way. The drill's changed a little bit, that I'll give them. But they've done the parade of the Trooping of the Color the exact same way for hundreds of years. Literally, the drill and parade, you watch this next year, if the Queen's still alive, well, hell, if she's dead, Prince Charles will become King Charles II. Well, no, King Charles III. And then you'll see the same parade over again, because they do it every year for whoever is the reigning monarch. But you'll see the exact same parade then that they did in the exact same way several hundred years ago. And so with that, I thank you once again for the support. And that's how we kind of do on this channel. I hope that we can keep up the same kind of traditionalism in a way here, and making sure that the streams are presented in the same way with the same kind of character and news delivery. So with that, we're on to the next question. And thank you once again for the support.
And also, if you haven't already, please hit that like button. It helps the channel so very much, and we appreciate you hitting that like button. So up next, we have a $5 super chat from Chris Webb, who says, thank you, Enforcer.
And I thank you so much, Chris, for enjoying the channel, and thank you so much for supporting it to keep it running, and also for telling us thanks as well, because it does mean a lot for us to get support from our viewers, both verbally and also to help us keep the lights on, because without those two things, it would be a pretty tough stream to run. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, let me give a shout out to Anana's Pizza and Michael J4729 for putting in a $5 donation each. And we thank you very much for your support. And up next, we have a super chat from Eduardo Gonzalez, who puts in a $5 donation and says, as an infantry platoon sergeant in the Leaf Spring Army, my leave has not been approved for August 15th through the 20th. What gives?
Well, I've got to be sorry, but of course some of our quartermasters kind of have some troubles getting around to those things. But since you have brought it to the attention of the Generalissimo Commander Mike Tyson of the leader of the Lysychansk army, I'm gonna give you approval to take those days off. But listen, you better stop talking out of turn, okay? I don't like it when people talk out of turn, especially people like you. And so I'm gonna give you those days off, but I just want you to know you're an asshole, all right? Well, wait a minute. No, that didn't really come out right. Anyways, I thank you so much for the support. Your leave is approved, and I hope that you do enjoy it a lot. And thank you so much once again for the support. And I hope you all did enjoy that little Mike Tyson impersonation again, because I see that a lot of people are having a lot of fun with that tonight. So either I'm doing it a lot better, or everyone's turned around and they're just having a good laugh with it. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 super chat from Fife, who says, after you talked about blowing up the bridge, I remembered Germany had a really awesome bunker buster called Taurus. Sadly, it's dropped by plane.
Yeah, that's the problem with most of the bunker busting munitions, is that they have to be dropped by plane, and the fact that a Ukrainian plane would be able to fly over Russian occupied territory in southern Ukraine, over the Sea of Azov, or over Crimea to the Kerch Bridge to drop that bomb is highly unlikely. And so it's sad to think that. Hopefully something can be done towards the aim of trying to destroy that bridge, because if it was able to be destroyed, that would be incredible news. I mean, like, maybe, and we're not going to say that, because that may be something that the Ukrainians are planning on doing that no one's thought about yet. So with that, we're gonna move on to the next question. But I thank you very much for the support, and also we've been running into that frustration as well, because every time we try and think of a way that the bridge can be destroyed, usually it's a way that would most likely be unfeasible. But with that, we're on to the next question, and thank you so much for the support.
All right, and we are now at our final super chat question of the night until we move on to our live chat question. So stick around. Up next, we have our last one, which is from Level 70, who puts in a $4 donation and says, today, Putin dared the West to try to stop him. That sounds like a green light for the West to send Ukraine any weapons they need. Do you agree?
I would largely agree. Actually, we did hear about that and talked about it earlier on in the night during the question segment. But I would certainly agree that if Putin wants to challenge the West directly into trying to beat Russia, then let's take him up on that invitation, and let's just send in everything and anything we could ever imagine for the Ukrainians, and maybe even a couple of pilots to show them physical examples of how to use them. So with that, I thank you very much for the support. And if Putin wants to challenge the West to almost a open war, then why not? He's pretty much already invited us in, and who are we to turn down a polite invitation in good company? And so with that, I thank you once again for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and first up from our live chat questions, we have one from Americano Ranger, who says, do you think China will supply Russia with new weapons?
I don't think so. And this is one that's hasn't been asked in a while. But there's a good reason to why I say no. The Chinese never, and I've said this multiple times, and this may be a broken record for some, but it's still an important story to tell. The Chinese are not a brute force kind of country like the United States. The United States can brute force itself around if it needs to, and really no one can stand in our way. And that's because we have grown ourselves so large economically that no one can really bring us down right now. Of course, eventually the United States will go into a decline, and it will eventually join the ranks of everyone else in the world as a normal country, much like the British did during the collapse of the British Empire in the mid to late 1900s. The 1900s. But right now, the Chinese are not in that position. The Chinese rely on a large manufacturing base and an export industry in their country to keep their economy growing, and so they heavily rely on stability to make sure that they can keep as powerful as they are, at least on paper. And so they cannot support the Russians, because if they did, and the United States was to immediately sanction all trade with China, along with the European Union, the Chinese economy would start to shrink $100 billion a year. And while that doesn't sound like a large amount, over the course of 10 years, their economy would most likely shrink by an entire trillion or more, and that's a massive amount. So in that regard, I would say that it would not be a smart idea, to actually come back around and answer the question now with the context. It would not be a smart idea for the Chinese current growth strategy to try and support the Russians, because in the process, they would end up destroying their own country and pretty much creating a situation where they'd never be able to do something like that again if they needed to. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a live chat question from Sweaty Chungus, who says, Enforcer, I was under the impression that Snake Island was of strategic importance to Ukrainian grain shipments. Am I incorrect on that assessment?
You are not incorrect on that assessment entirely, but it's somewhat important, but it's not really too important. Snake Island, pretty much the only reason it is manned anymore by anyone is because Snake Island is a rocky outcropping, and I'm trying to figure out how to word that because I was having a hard time coming up with the word rocky outcropping, but it's a rocky outcropping, and so you have to have a group of people there to make sure that I guess you could say, modern lighthouse, which is pretty much just a relay beacon, stays on and make sure to let ships know not to run into the rocky reefs around the island, or else a ship could run aground, get broken up on the rocks, and, dozens of people could get killed and thousands of tons of cargo could be lost. And that's really the only reason that Snake Island is a strategically important position to man. Beyond that, anti-ship batteries don't really get an additional amount of range out of them. They would only get an additional 20 miles of range, which may seem decent, but 20 miles of range is not really going to stop the Russians from getting within range of Ukrainian ships further downstream and then destroying them there. And so it is important in some ways, but not as important as one would think. So with that, it's not a wrong assessment. It's just that not a lot of emphasis should be put on Snake Island as a geographical and strategically defensible location, and more on its I guess you could say, significance as a natural obstacle. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question in a way. At least that's how I'm viewing the situation. Now, I could be wrong. It could be an actual important strategic location, and that's why the Russians may have stocked it full of equipment to then be destroyed. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, Sweaty Chungus. And with that, we're going to answer 2 more questions from the live chat, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream.
And next up, we have a live chat question from Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, since the Russian criminal leadership and oligarchs exploit and disrespect their own people, does this make them more narcissistic and likely to betray their motherland?
I think it can. We can see that the Russians, by and large, can turn on their people pretty quickly as long as it suits their advantage. And so I do believe that that is something that Russian oligarchs may do. But once again, I always like to make this distinction. The oligarchs didn't make Putin. Putin made the oligarchs. And so in terms of that kind of power structure, if Putin put them there, he can usually, as history shows, you can usually put them back out. But if the oligarchs put Putin in charge, then he would be in threat of being removed. But it's the other way around. So with that, I hope that does answer that question. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who's the lucky last person who got in the final question? And after we answer that question, we'll check on Shinzo's condition again before the stream ends.
All right, and the final live chat question of the night goes to Sasui90, who says, Enforcer, would M1 Abrams be helpful to Ukraine, or do you think they'd run into a similar issue as the Russian armor?
I think they would be helpful to Ukraine. We haven't really seen that's kind of not true. I have to catch myself there. We have seen Western tanks in action in Iraq. We've seen the Iraqis using almost entirely M1A1 Abrams, and we've actually seen about 500 of them get destroyed over the course of several years. And so, in that perspective, M1A1 Abrams may be as susceptible to being destroyed as the standard Russian main battle tank. And so, while I would be inclined to say that they would be pretty solid tanks and they'd probably perform fairly well, I do have to remember that the Russians had the exact same complex about their tanks, as well as the Germans, and we ended up seeing Leopard 2s getting destroyed by the handful, well, by the dozens, really, in Syria when the Turks pushed in the north, and we have also seen Russian tanks been destroyed in the thousands now in Ukraine, and so I believe that American tanks could fall down that exact same route. No tank is invincible, no weapon that you ever field will be indestructible, and so the Abrams could be destroyed, but the question is, how easily could it be destroyed? And I'm not really sure how to answer that. My inclination, of course, would be to say it would be pretty tough to destroy it, but then again, about 500 of them have been destroyed in Iraqi hands, and that gives us an indication that M1 Abrams may also be pretty easy to knock out. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least in a way, and give a little bit of context to it that might be able to answer the question in its own way. And with that, we've now reached the end of tonight's stream. Before we go, we're going to check on the Shinzo Abe news again. Shinzo Abe. So CNN updated their post 11 minutes ago. Has been rushed to hospital, shot in the chest during a speech in Nara, Japan, citing official of the Liberal Democratic Party Abe faction. His condition is unknown, Japan's chief cabinet secretary Hirokazu Matsuno said, according to Reuters. Police have arrested a man on suspicion of attempted murder and retrieved a gun. Of course, we saw that gun in a picture. Abe held office from 2006 to 2007, and again from 2012 to 2020, making him the longest-serving Japanese prime minister in history. He stepped down as prime minister in 2020 before the end of his term, citing health reasons. So, of course, very unfortunate.
And Enforcer, I will add, I've been scouring Twitter to see if I can find any other information. And unfortunately, it looks like some independent journalists are saying, and this is unofficial, just to be clear, that the prime minister is reportedly dead. It's unconfirmed, but sources close to the matter say that he is unfortunately passed away.
And that's, of course, unfortunate to hear. And it's honestly insane that it's, of course, happened on stream. But we have heard the unfortunate news. We will be waiting for confirmation tomorrow, and we'll confirm it on stream tomorrow if Shinzo Abe is dead. But as far as we know right now, he was shot in the chest twice by an improvised sawed-off shotgun, and he has been officially declared dead, and he was shot in Nara, Japan. With that bombshell, it is now time to end tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for watching. I wish you all a great night. And I'll see you all here tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next day of the news of the war in Ukraine. And we'll, of course, be given an update to see whether Shinzo Abe is actually dead or not. Thank you all once again for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Good night, take care, and I'll see you then.